In the year 2000, a landmark study conducted by psychologists Sheena Iyengar and Mark Lepper forever changed the way we think about choice. Known as the jam experiment, the study took place in a high-end grocery store in Menlo Park, California. The researchers wanted to investigate a simple but profound question. Does offering more options lead to better outcomes in consumer behavior? To find the answer, they set up 2 different jam tasting booths. One display offered 24 different flavors of jam, while the other offered just 6. Shoppers were invited to sample the jams and were given a coupon to purchase one at a discount. The results stunned marketers, psychologists, and economists alike. Although more people stopped at the booth with 24 flavors, attracting 60% of passers-by compared to just 40% at the smaller display, the booth with fewer choices led to significantly more purchases. Only about 3% of people who stopped at the 24 jam display actually bought a jar, while a whopping 30% of those who visited the 6 jam display made a purchase. This finding turned the conventional wisdom of marketing on its head. Before this experiment, the prevailing belief was that more choice equaled more freedom, and that more freedom led to greater satisfaction. Marketers often assumed that customers wanted endless variety and that offering more options would inevitably lead to more sales. The jam experiment directly contradicted that idea. Instead, it demonstrated the phenomenon now known as choice overload, or the paradox of choice. When faced with too many options, people often become overwhelmed, anxious, and ultimately paralyzed, unable to make a decision at all. This insight has had far-reaching implications not only in marketing, but in fields as diverse as behavioral economics, public policy, healthcare, and digital design. The psychological mechanisms behind this effect are both intuitive and complex. First, with more options comes more cognitive load. Shoppers must analyze, compare, and weigh a greater number of alternatives, each with its own pros and cons. This increases the time and effort required to make a decision, which in turn raises the mental cost of committing to a single choice. Second, with more choices comes more opportunity for regret. The more options there are, the more likely it is that a person will worry about having made the wrong choice. This fear of missing out on a better alternative can lead to dissatisfaction, even when the choice made is objectively good. Finally, more options tend to raise expectations. With so much to choose from, people expect to find something perfect. When that doesn't happen, disappointment sets in. Fewer choices help temper those expectations, often leading to greater satisfaction with the outcome. The implications of the jam experiment quickly rippled through the business world. Retailers began to reconsider the size of their product lines. Online platforms like Netflix and Amazon began experimenting with curated recommendations and simplified interfaces. The idea was not to remove choice, but to manage it, guiding users gently toward a decision rather than overwhelming them. In the digital age, where nearly infinite options are just a click away, the concept of choice overload has become more relevant than ever. Social media platforms now prioritize content using algorithms that tailor feeds to users' preferences, reducing the mental burden of having to choose what to consume. E-commerce websites offer filters and sorting mechanisms to help customers narrow down their options quickly and efficiently. Even restaurants, once proud of their encyclopedic menus, have begun to trim down to focus on a few core dishes that they do well. The jam experiment also holds lessons beyond consumer behavior. In healthcare, for example, patients often face a dizzying array of treatment options, medications, and specialists. While patient autonomy is a cornerstone of modern medicine, too much choice can be counterproductive. Studies have shown that patients may experience anxiety and indecision when faced with complex medical decisions, particularly if the differences between options are subtle or the outcomes uncertain. In education, students selecting college majors or elective courses may experience similar paralysis, especially when the number of options grows too large. In such contexts, choice architecture, how choices are presented, becomes crucial. The idea that less is more is not new, but the JAM experiment provided hard data to back it up and made the case in a way that was accessible and actionable. It underscored the importance of simplicity and clarity in decision-making environments. It also raised ethical questions about how choice should be structured. Should institutions limit choices to protect individuals from decision fatigue, or should they prioritize autonomy even if it leads to worse outcomes? These are ongoing debates, but the JAM experiment remains a pivotal point of reference. Interestingly, the effect of choice overload doesn't apply equally in all situations. Context matters. People are more likely to appreciate a large selection when they are browsing rather than buying, or when they are experts in the domain rather than novices. A sommelier might thrive on a wine list with 200 options, while a casual diner might prefer a handful of house specials. Likewise, people may enjoy exploring a bookstore with thousands of titles, but appreciate a short list of staff picks when they're ready to make a purchase. This nuance has led to more sophisticated strategies in managing choice, offering variety for exploration, but guidance for decisions. The Ship of Theseus is one of the oldest and most enduring philosophical puzzles, dating back to ancient Greece. The thought experiment is deceptively simple. Imagine a wooden ship that, over time, has each of its planks, nails, sails, and beams replaced one by one. Eventually, none of the original materials remain. The question then arises, after all the components have been replaced, is it still the same ship? And to complicate things further, what if someone collected all the original pieces and reassembled them elsewhere into a ship identical to the original? Which one, if either, is the true Ship of Theseus? This paradox is not just a mental exercise about boats. It's a deep exploration of identity, change, continuity, and what it means to remain the same through time. At the core of the paradox is the tension between form and substance. One way to interpret the problem is through a material lens. If the identity of an object is based on the physical matter it is made of, then once every piece is replaced, the ship is no longer the same. But another perspective focuses on continuity and function. If the ship continues to serve the same role, has the same structure, and is seen as the same by those who interact with it, then perhaps its identity endures despite the changes in material. This tension is not merely academic. It plays out in real-world scenarios all the time, in ways that are surprisingly personal and complex. Take the human body. Biologically speaking, the cells in our bodies are constantly regenerating. Skin cells renew every few weeks, bone cells take about a decade, and most of the atoms in our bodies are eventually replaced over time. Despite this turnover, we consider ourselves to be the same person from year to year. Why? Because identity, for humans, is often tied less to physical matter and more to continuity of consciousness, memory, personality, and social recognition. This is where the Ship of Theseus becomes a metaphor for the human experience. Are we the same person we were 10 years ago? Our bodies have changed, our minds have evolved, our experiences have shaped us, yet we maintain a sense of a stable self, anchored not in unchanging components, but in narrative and continuity. The paradox also takes on a new dimension in the digital age. Consider a computer or smartphone. Over time, you might replace the battery, upgrade the hard drive, change the operating system, and install new parts until none of the original components remain. Is it still your computer? Most people would say yes, especially if it still performs the same tasks and contains the same data. Now think about digital identities, social media profiles, cloud storage, avatars in online worlds. If you change your username, your profile picture, your posts, your followers, and even your interests over time, is your online identity still you? This is not just a theoretical issue for philosophers anymore. It affects how we think about identity in a world where data persists, evolves, and migrates across platforms. Memory is another key theme illuminated by the paradox. Human memory is famously unreliable and subject to change. Neuroscience shows that every time we recall a memory, we slightly alter it. In a sense, the parts of our remembered past are continuously replaced, yet we rely on memory as a foundation for personal identity. If memory is constantly shifting, to what extent can we trust our sense of self? This calls into question whether identity is a fixed construct or something more fluid, like a ship sailing through time, constantly mended, but still somehow the same vessel. The paradox also intersects with questions of consciousness. If in the future we could transfer all our thoughts, memories, and experiences into a synthetic body or a computer, would the resulting entity still be us? Science fiction has long toyed with this idea: mind uploading, digital immortality, cloning. The core question is the same as the ship of Theseus. Is continuity of structure and function enough to preserve identity, even if the substance is entirely new? Some argue that if the mind's pattern is preserved, the self persists. Others say that without the original biological substrate, something essential is lost. These debates touch on the essence of what it means to be human. Even legal and moral systems grapple with Theseus-like questions. Consider the case of a company that has changed its employees, products, policies, and leadership over decades. Is it still the same company? What if it retains its name and brand, but nothing else? Legal systems often recognize entities as continuous despite internal change, but there are limits. If the changes are too drastic or the original purpose too altered, continuity may be denied. Similarly, in personal identity, someone who has undergone profound psychological transformation through trauma, neurological injury, or significant life experiences may still be legally the same person, but their inner sense of self might tell a different story. Ultimately, the ship of Theseus invites us to rethink how we define identity. It challenges us to consider whether being the same means preserving the original parts, maintaining the same function, or simply continuing through time in a coherent narrative. Perhaps identity is not a static object, but a process, an evolving, dynamic construction made meaningful by our experiences, relationships, and memories. Like a ship maintained over many voyages, we are never exactly the same from one moment to the next, yet somehow we still call ourselves me. That paradox doesn't need to be solved to be meaningful. It continues to inspire thought, conversation, and reflection on what it means to endure in a world that never stops changing. The Mercator projection is likely the map most people remember from classrooms, textbooks, or hanging on a wall. It presents the world with straight vertical and horizontal lines, making it easy to navigate and read. But it comes with a hidden cost, a significant distortion of size that has quietly shaped how generations perceive the world. At the heart of this distortion is how the Mercator projection handles latitude. Developed by Gerardus Mercator in 1569 for nautical purposes, the map was designed to aid sailors by preserving angles and directions, which was invaluable for navigation. However, to achieve this, the projection stretched land masses the farther they were from the equator, enlarging areas near the poles while shrinking those near the equator. This resulted in a world map where Greenland appears roughly the same size as Africa, even though Africa is about 14 times larger in reality. This is not a trivial mistake. It has consequences. When maps are used as tools of education, representation, and even policy making, their inaccuracies become more than just mathematical quirks. They start to shape how we understand the world and our place in it. The Mercator projection makes Europe, North America, and Russia appear larger and therefore more significant. Meanwhile, countries in Africa, South America, and Southeast Asia appear smaller, more marginal, and perhaps subconsciously less important. This isn't just a cartographic error, it's a reflection of power and legacy. The Mercator map became dominant during a period of European imperialism, and in that context, showing the colonizing nations as large and central was not just convenient, but symbolic. The size of a country on a map can affect how people perceive its importance, power, or influence. If a student sees Greenland looking as big as Africa, they may unconsciously think of them as comparable in stature or relevance. If the United States looks enormous compared to Brazil, that perception sticks. These distortions influence everything from worldviews to how aid is distributed, how stories are told in the media, and even how military strategy is imagined. The map we grow up with becomes the map we carry in our heads, and its biases, intentional or not, become part of our understanding of global power structures. This phenomenon can be especially damaging for countries that are already underrepresented or marginalized in global discourse. Africa, in particular, suffers from this cartographic bias. Not only is it the second largest continent by both area and population, but it is also home to a rich tapestry of cultures, languages, histories, and resources. Yet on the Mercator map, its size is minimized. This visual shrinking contributes to a kind of global amnesia or disregard. It becomes easier to overlook African voices in international politics, development, and innovation, when the very tools we use to depict the world visually minimize the continent's presence. Cartography is never neutral. Every map is a story about the world, and every projection carries values, intentions, and consequences. The Mercator projection tells a story that centers the Western world, magnifies its presence, and simplifies the rest. Alternatives have existed for decades, such as the Gall-Peters projection, which aims to preserve area rather than shape, and the Robinson projection, which seeks a balance of distortion. Yet these alternatives rarely show up in classrooms or mainstream media. Why? Perhaps because the Mercator map is familiar, standardized, and has become deeply entrenched in how we imagine geography. But familiarity is not the same as accuracy, and standardization doesn't equal fairness. When we start questioning the maps we've inherited, we begin to see how many other inherited assumptions they carry. It's not just about the physical size of countries, it's about the mental and political space they occupy in our consciousness. By keeping certain regions large and prominent and others small and peripheral, the Mercator projection subtly reinforces hierarchies that echo colonial histories and geopolitical dominance. The countries that once controlled the seas and built empires now dominate the map, both literally and symbolically. The implications of this distortion go beyond education or representation. In a globalized world, understanding the true scale of nations affects how we plan trade, how we think about climate change, how we imagine migration patterns, and how we engage in diplomacy. When Africa is properly scaled, it becomes clear how vast and varied the continent truly is, and how much potential it holds. When island nations near the equator are accurately depicted, we recognize their vulnerability to rising sea levels. Realigning our mental maps to reflect geographical reality helps us make better decisions, rooted in truth rather than legacy distortion. Some movements and educators have begun pushing for greater use of more accurate projections in schools and public spaces. The Gall-Peters projection, despite initial resistance, has been adopted by some institutions and has sparked conversations about decolonizing education. These efforts matter. Changing a map may seem like a small act, but it's one that challenges deeply embedded narratives about who matters and how the world works. Ultimately, the Mercator projection reminds us that the tools we use to see the world can limit our understanding of it. When a map lies, by stretching, shrinking, or centering, it doesn't just distort space, it distorts value, relevance, and agency. It tells a story that some places are big and important, and others are small and forgettable. But the world isn't built that way. Africa is massive. Greenland is not, and until our maps reflect that, our mental images of the world will remain tilted, quite literally, in favor of the past. Re-examining the maps we rely on is one way to begin seeing the world not as it was once drawn, but as it truly is. The idea that we see the world as it is seems obvious. We open our eyes, and the world appears in vivid detail. Colors, shapes, motion, depth. But recent theories in neuroscience challenge this intuition. According to the predictive brain model, your brain is not simply a passive receiver of sensory data. Instead, it is actively predicting what it expects to see, hear, feel, or smell based on prior experience, and it uses incoming sensory data to confirm or correct those predictions. In other words, perception is not just the result of sensory input. It is a kind of controlled hallucination, shaped more by your brain's best guesses than by direct access to objective reality. This theory, sometimes called predictive processing, has gained traction in cognitive science as a powerful framework for understanding how the brain works. Rather than viewing the brain as a camera or microphone that records the world as it is, the predictive brain theory suggests that the brain is more like a scientist or artist, constantly creating hypotheses and updating them with new data. It constructs internal models of the world and compares those models against the flood of sensory information it receives. What you see is actually the brain's interpretation of that data, filtered through your expectations, past experiences, and context. An everyday example of this is how we recognize faces. You don't build up a face from scratch each time you see one. Your brain quickly fills in what it expects to see: eyes, nose, mouth, expressions, based on countless previous encounters with faces. That's why we can so easily recognize people even in poor lighting, from odd angles, or when part of their face is obscured. It's also why we sometimes see faces where there aren't any at all, like in clouds or rock formations, a phenomenon known as pareidolia. The brain is biased to find patterns, especially familiar ones, and it often perceives what it predicts, even when the data is ambiguous. One of the most striking pieces of evidence for predictive processing comes from illusions. Optical illusions often work, because they exploit the brain's assumptions about how the world should behave. The famous checker shadow illusion, where two squares that are the same shade appear to be vastly different due to the shadow of a cylinder, tricks your brain into applying lighting assumptions automatically. Your brain corrects for what it thinks is a shadow, making one square appear lighter than it really is. This correction isn't something you choose. It happens instantly and unconsciously. What this reveals is that perception is not about raw data, but about inference. Another compelling example comes from auditory perception. The phantom words illusion, or the McGurk effect, show how the brain integrates different types of sensory information and how expectation can override reality. In the McGurk effect, if you hear a sound like bay, but see someone's lips moving as if they're saying fa, your brain may actually perceive fa. The sensory data from your ears says one thing, but your visual system expects something else, and the brain resolves the conflict by favoring the prediction. This kind of integration points to just how dominant the predictive model is. Your brain is constantly trying to make the best possible guess from incomplete information. This predictive machinery is efficient but not infallible. In fact, it can explain certain mental health conditions. For example, in schizophrenia, some researchers believe that the brain's prediction error mechanisms may be faulty, causing individuals to place too much weight on sensory data or to misattribute internally generated thoughts as external voices. In conditions like depression, the brain's predictions may be biased toward negative outcomes, shaping perception in a way that reinforces hopelessness. Even chronic pain can be understood in terms of prediction, where the brain continues to expect pain even in the absence of harmful stimuli, perpetuating the sensation. The concept of the predictive brain also reshapes how we think about consciousness. If perception is the brain's best guess, then what we experience as reality is essentially a simulation, a reconstruction based on the brain's internal model. Philosopher Andy Clark and neuroscientist Anil Seth have described this as controlled hallucination. In this view, hallucinations aren't the brain doing something unusual. They're just perception gone slightly off course. The line between accurate perception and hallucination becomes a matter of degree and calibration, rather than a sharp distinction. This doesn't mean we live in a fantasy. The external world does exist and provides the data our brain needs to adjust its predictions. But it does mean that what we see, hear, and feel is always filtered and shaped by the brain's internal expectations. Reality is not delivered raw, it's interpreted, and those interpretations are influenced by everything we've learned, everything we believe, and everything we anticipate. Understanding perception as prediction also has profound implications for artificial intelligence and machine learning. Systems like deep neural networks are increasingly built on models that predict future inputs or correct for errors, mimicking the brain's strategy. As AI becomes better at modeling the world, it too begins to make sense of reality through prediction. This parallel hints at a deeper principle of intelligence, biological or artificial, as something that emerges not from reaction alone, but from proactive guessing and constant adjustment. The predictive brain theory ultimately reframes what it means to know and to experience. It suggests that the stability of our world, the solidity of objects, the reliability of time and space are not directly accessed but internally constructed. It places the brain not as a mirror of the world, but as its interpreter and predictor. And while this may seem unsettling, it also opens a new appreciation for how remarkably adaptive, flexible, and creative our minds truly are. We may never experience the world exactly as it is, but through this ongoing dance of prediction and correction, we come astonishingly close. The Cotard delusion is one of the most eerie and perplexing conditions in all of neuroscience and psychiatry. It is a rare but deeply disturbing mental illness in which a person comes to believe that they are dead, no longer exist, or have lost their internal organs, blood, or even soul. First described by French neurologist Jules Cotard in the late 19th century, the condition is sometimes called walking corpse syndrome, and for good reason. Individuals suffering from Cotard's may insist they are corpses, deny the existence of their own body, or claim to be immortal in the most paradoxical sense, not because they believe they cannot die, but because they believe they already have. The delusion defies common logic and continues to challenge our understanding of consciousness, self-awareness, and the fragile boundaries between reality and perception. People with Cotard delusion do not simply say these things metaphorically or as expressions of depression. They believe them with a certainty that is resistant to reason or contradiction. There are recorded cases of people refusing to eat because they believe their stomachs no longer exist, or that food cannot help someone who is already dead. Others have visited morgues to seek confirmation of their death, or asked to be buried. Some believe they are rotting, that their body is decomposing in real time, or that they are trapped in a form of purgatory. It's not only a clinical curiosity, but a human tragedy. These are people fully convinced of their own non-existence, living in a psychological state that most of us cannot even imagine. What makes Cotard delusion so disturbing is not just the content of the belief, but the way it collapses the basic architecture of selfhood. Most people take for granted the feeling that they are alive, that they exist, that their body is theirs, and that their mind resides somewhere behind their eyes. Cotard's disrupts this basic assumption in a way that's more than just false belief. It's a rupture in the core experience of being. This is different from depression or low self-esteem. It is a wholesale disintegration of the sense of self and aliveness. In this sense, Cotard delusion is not just a psychological anomaly, it is a direct challenge to how we understand consciousness. Despite its dramatic nature, Cotard delusion remains deeply mysterious. Neuroscience has offered partial explanations, but none are definitive. It often appears in the context of severe depression, psychotic episodes, or neurological conditions like brain injury, multiple sclerosis, and epilepsy. Some researchers believe it may involve damage to areas of the brain responsible for processing emotion and bodily awareness, such as the fusiform gyrus and the parietal lobe. There is also speculation that Cotard's may involve a failure in the brain's default mode network, a network believed to be involved in self-referential thinking. In simpler terms, parts of the brain that normally help us feel connected to our own body and thoughts may go offline or become disrupted, leading to a profound detachment from the sense of being alive. Some theories draw parallels to another rare condition called Capgras delusion, in which individuals believe that a loved one has been replaced by an imposter. Both delusions involve a breakdown in the integration of emotional recognition with rational thought. In Capgras, a person recognizes someone's face but doesn't feel the usual emotional response, so they conclude it must be a duplicate. In Cotard's, something similar may happen with the self. The person looks in the mirror, feels nothing, and concludes they no longer exist. The brain, when confronted with a profound absence of emotional feedback, may default to the most extreme conclusion it can generate: Treatment for Cotard delusion is difficult and varies from case to case. Antidepressants, antipsychotics, and electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, have all been used with varying degrees of success. ECT, in particular, has shown surprising effectiveness in some patients, possibly because it resets certain neural circuits tied to mood and cognition. But treatment is rarely quick or simple. Since those with Cotards may not believe they are alive, they are often resistant to therapy, medication, or even basic care. Convincing someone to take medication when they believe they have no body can be an enormous hurdle. And since the delusion often occurs alongside other severe mental health conditions, such as schizophrenia or major depressive disorder, the overall prognosis is complicated. What Cotard delusion ultimately reveals is how delicate and constructed our sense of self truly is. We assume that the feeling of being alive is a given, but it is actually the product of countless neural processes working in harmony. Disrupt that harmony, and the results can be existentially devastating. The delusion also pushes against the boundaries of how we define reality. If someone is utterly convinced they are dead, and that conviction colors every moment of their existence, how do we say with confidence what is real for them? It challenges the assumption that perception and belief must conform to objective facts, showing instead that reality, for each of us, is a construct shaped by the brain's internal model. Cotard delusion also opens difficult philosophical questions. What does it mean to exist? Is self-awareness a constant state, or something the brain maintains through continual reinforcement? If a person feels dead but continues to act in the world, talking, walking, interacting, what does that say about the nature of identity? Are we our thoughts, our bodies, our sense of presence? Cotards peels back these assumptions and reveals the shocking possibility that the mind can completely divorce from the self, leaving behind a shell that moves through the world without believing it belongs to it. Though rare, Cotard delusion serves as a powerful reminder of how fragile and strange the human mind can be. It is a mirror turned back on our most basic assumptions, showing us that even the feeling of being alive is not guaranteed. For those who suffer from it, it is not a metaphor or a mood. It is a haunting lived experience that neuroscience has yet to fully unravel. In trying to understand it, we come closer to understanding ourselves, not just how the brain works, but how it constructs the illusion of life, self, and meaning in the first place. In a world that moves fast and forgets quickly, it is astonishing to realize that there are clocks still ticking today that were built over 700 years ago. These medieval mechanical clocks, many dating back to the 1300s, have outlived empires, weathered revolutions, and quietly persisted through technological eras without ever becoming obsolete. These are not just instruments for keeping time. They are symbols of human ingenuity, ambition, and a profound belief in the possibility of self-sustaining design. Long before digital circuits and battery backups, people found a way to harness gravity, gears, and craftsmanship to build machines that could run almost indefinitely with only minimal human interaction. The question is not only how they did it, but why they did it, and what it reveals about how we think about time, permanence, and legacy. The earliest mechanical clocks emerged in Europe during the late 13th and early 14th centuries, primarily in monasteries where the precise timing of prayers was essential. These clocks marked a departure from earlier timekeeping methods like sundials, water clocks, and hourglasses, which were all limited by the elements or the need for constant supervision. The innovation of mechanical clocks came from a new understanding of how to regulate motion through escapements, a mechanism that allows energy to be released in controlled increments. The verge escapement, one of the earliest forms, allowed a gear to move forward a small amount at a time, driving the clock hands while being powered by a descending weight. Gravity, not electricity or springs, was the energy source, and as long as the weight was lifted back up, usually once a day, the clock could run continuously. These early timepieces were massive, often installed in church towers or public buildings. They served not just to keep time, but to display civic pride and technological sophistication. The Salisbury Cathedral clock in England, built around 1386, is one of the oldest working mechanical clocks in the world. It originally had no face. Its purpose was to strike a bell on the hour, a public signal in an age when few people had access to personal timekeeping. Despite its age, it still ticks today, a testament to the durability and precision of medieval engineering. The fact that it functions centuries later without electronic components challenges our assumptions about what counts as advanced technology. These clocks were made from wrought iron and hand-forged parts, shaped with care by blacksmiths and craftsmen who lacked modern tools, yet possessed extraordinary skill. Each gear was individually filed, each pin carefully placed. There were no standardized parts, so every piece was unique and had to fit precisely with the others. The durability of these clocks comes not from modern materials, but from thoughtful design, redundancy, and simplicity. They were built with the assumption that they would be maintained by generations to come, designed not to be disposable, but to be part of a long lineage of care and attention. In that way, they were not just machines, but inheritances. The concept of a self-sustaining mechanism was a radical idea in the 1300s. The very notion that something could run perpetually, or at least for long periods, without direct human intervention, was groundbreaking. It suggested a new relationship to time. Time was no longer tied to the sun or a burning candle. It became something internal, mechanical, predictable. This had profound implications not only for monastic life, but for society at large. Commerce, governance, labor, and urban life began to be organized more rigidly around the clock, shifting the human experience from cyclical natural rhythms to linear mechanical ones. These early clocks helped birth the modern sense of time, divisible, quantifiable, and external to nature. What makes the survival of these ancient clocks so remarkable is not just that they still run, but that they were intended to last. This contrasts sharply with much of today's technology, which is often designed with obsolescence in mind. Phones, appliances, and even cars are built to be replaced within a decade or less. But medieval clockmakers were creating artifacts for the ages. They imagined a future in which their work would still be valued and maintained, and so they built with longevity as a primary goal. Their designs invite us to rethink what sustainability means, not just in terms of energy use, but in the life cycles of the objects we create. These clocks also reflect a philosophical worldview. Timekeeping was not just practical, it was sacred. Time was believed to be a divine order, a rhythm set by God. By building clocks, people were not just organizing their day, they were aligning themselves with a cosmic principle. The beauty and intricacy of these clocks, many adorned with astronomical dials, moving figures, and elaborate carvings, show that they were meant to be admired as much as used. They were public spectacles and private meditations, reminders of time's passage and of the human ability to understand and mark it. Today, when we carry smartphones that sync to satellites and update to the millisecond, the idea of a giant iron clock slowly turning its gears might seem quaint. But there is a profound difference in experience. The mechanical clock invites awareness of time's passage, the weight of hours, the rhythm of the world turning. You can hear it, feel it, see it moving. It does not vanish into the background like digital time. It reminds us that we are in time, subject to its flow, part of a continuum much larger than our moment. The mechanical clocks that have outlived civilizations are more than curiosities. They are symbols of a different approach to technology and life. They represent an age when the goal was not speed, but endurance, not innovation for its own sake, but craftsmanship with a purpose. They ask us what we're building today that might last 700 years, and whether we still believe in creating things meant to outlive us. Their continued ticking is not just a sound, it's a message from the past, urging us to build with care, to think in centuries, and to honor the slow but steady movement of time. In the bustling chaos of modern cities, sleep has become a battleground. Sirens, car horns, neon lights, and the never-ending hum of electricity pierce through walls and windows, turning what should be restful nights into fragmented cycles of interrupted slumber. Most people accept this as the cost of urban life, an unavoidable byproduct of density and technology. But in ancient Mesopotamia, one of the world's first cradles of civilization, the relationship between the city and sleep was entirely different. These early urban planners understood that architecture and environment could either disrupt or support the natural rhythms of the human body, and they made deliberate choices to ensure that people could sleep in peace. In cities like Ur and Uruk, evidence suggests that town layouts, building materials, and even ritualized soundscapes were used to create a kind of sonic harmony at night, gently guiding the body into rest. The ancients knew, even without modern neuroscience, that sleep was sacred. In Mesopotamian culture, sleep was not just a physical necessity, but a spiritual event, a time when the soul could interact with the divine, and the future could be glimpsed through dreams. The Sumerians and Akkadians recorded dreams in clay tablets, interpreting them through ritual and mythology. To facilitate this journey into the subconscious, cities were designed to calm the senses after dark. Narrow alleys dampened wind and reduced echoes. Thick mud brick walls absorbed and softened ambient noise. Courtyards allowed air to circulate and light to dim naturally as the sun set, reducing the body's exposure to overstimulation. In some reconstructions of Mesopotamian towns, scholars have noted the likely presence of soft, rhythmic sounds, perhaps from controlled water features, gentle night music, or ritual chants, that may have served as auditory cues to wind down and signal communal rest. Contrast this with the modern city, which rarely sleeps and almost never goes quiet. We have inverted the logic of ancient design. Urban spaces today are optimized for productivity, speed, and visibility, not rest. Artificial lighting, particularly blue spectrum light from screens and street lamps, disrupts the natural circadian rhythm by suppressing melatonin production, the hormone that helps signal sleep to the brain. The result is a growing epidemic of insomnia, sleep deprivation, and related health issues such as depression, anxiety, obesity, and heart disease. We are slowly learning what the Mesopotamians may have known intuitively, that the environment we sleep in profoundly shapes how well we rest. The circadian rhythm, our internal biological clock, is highly sensitive to environmental cues, known as Zeitgebers, light and sound being the most powerful among them. When we live in environments that do not respect these natural signals, our bodies become confused. Light at night tricks the brain into staying alert. Sudden, unpredictable noise causes micro-arousals, tiny awakenings that prevent the deep, restorative stages of sleep from occurring. This disruption doesn't just make us tired, it affects memory consolidation, immune function, mood regulation, and even long-term brain health. Cities that never darken or quiet down are essentially waging war on our most fundamental biological processes. It's ironic that in a time of unprecedented technological advancement, we have created urban spaces that ignore the most basic needs of the human body. Ancient Mesopotamians, with none of our modern tools or understanding of neurobiology, managed to create cities that worked with, not against, the human sleep cycle. Their focus on tranquility and harmony wasn't just aesthetic, it was deeply practical. They saw sleep as a shared experience, one that required communal participation and mutual respect. Nighttime had a rhythm and a protocol. The modern city, by contrast, often isolates its inhabitants in individual units while surrounding them with collective noise and light. Instead of winding down together, people lie awake alone, each fighting their own battle against the city that refuses to rest. There is a growing movement among architects, urban planners, and neuroscientists to return to some of these older principles. Cities like Copenhagen and Amsterdam are experimenting with dark zones that limit artificial light pollution. Noise ordinances are being re-evaluated, not just for nuisance control, but for health outcomes. Sleep-friendly building designs with soundproofing, natural materials, and daylight-sensitive architecture are becoming more common in high-end housing, though they remain rare in public infrastructure. Still, these developments point to a recognition that the ancient wisdom of sleep-supportive environments is not just relevant, it's necessary. Looking back at ancient Mesopotamian cities reminds us that our surroundings do not have to be chaotic by default. Noise and light are not mere byproducts of progress. They are variables that can be controlled, shaped, and even designed with care. Sleep is not a private luxury, it's a public good, a cornerstone of both individual health and societal well-being. By revisiting the priorities of early city builders, we can begin to imagine modern cities that support rest as actively as they support work. It requires a shift in mindset, from seeing the city as a machine of constant output to viewing it as a habitat for living, breathing, dreaming beings. Sleep is where the mind recalibrates, where the body heals, and where the soul, as the Mesopotamians believed, drifts into realms beyond this one. A city that honors sleep, honors life itself. The ancients may not have had our science, but they had an intimate understanding of rhythm, balance, and the human need for silence. Their cities, built for sleep, whisper across time, reminding us that in the dark and the quiet, we do our most important living. Blue is one of the most beloved and omnipresent colors in the modern world, found in everything from the sky and the sea to clothing, branding, and national flags. Yet the history of blue is far more elusive than it seems. Despite the sky stretching in blue expanse over every ancient civilization, the word for blue is conspicuously absent in many of the earliest languages. Homer, in the Odyssey, described the sea as wine dark, but never once called it blue. In fact, no ancient Greek text makes mention of the color. This omission isn't unique to Greece. Similar patterns exist across early Egyptian, Chinese, Hebrew, and Sanskrit writings. This raises a profound and puzzling question. Did ancient people actually see the color blue, or is color perception itself a cultural construct shaped by language and environment. The question is not whether the color blue existed. Obviously, it did, but whether people noticed it as a distinct category of color. When researchers began exploring this phenomenon in the 19th century, they turned to linguistic anthropology, a study by William Gladstone, who was also a scholar of Homer, found that color references in Homeric epics were strangely limited. Black and white were mentioned frequently, red and yellow occasionally, but blue was entirely missing. Later, philologist Lazarus Geiger expanded this research across other ancient texts and noticed a consistent pattern. Most cultures added color terms in a specific order. First came black and white, then red, followed by yellow and green, and blue always came last. This trend holds across languages and appears to reflect how humans cognitively differentiate colors. Blue, it seems, is one of the hardest colors to identify and categorize without specific environmental or technological influences. One theory is that the rarity of naturally occurring blue materials in the environment made the color less noticeable. Unlike red, which is seen in blood and ripe fruit, or green, which dominates the plant world, blue is surprisingly scarce in nature. There are very few blue animals, even fewer blue flowers, and almost no edible blue substances. The sky, although visually blue to us today, may not have been described that way because it lacks a tangible reference point. Describing the sky as blue might not be intuitive without the concept already existing in language. The same goes for large bodies of water. The sea often looks gray, green, or reflects surrounding colors depending on weather and light. Without a word for blue, early humans may have simply described such scenes using terms already available to them. Language influences perception more deeply than we often realize. The Sapir-Whorf hypothesis, a theory in linguistic relativity, suggests that the structure of a language affects its speaker's worldview and cognition. In the case of color, studies have shown that speakers of languages with more color terms can distinguish subtle differences in shades that others may not notice. For example, in some African and Pacific island languages, there are multiple words for what English speakers would all call green, leading to faster and more accurate identification of hues in that range. When it comes to blue, experiments have revealed that individuals from cultures with no separate word for blue may have difficulty distinguishing it from green. To the modern mind, blue and green are fundamentally different, but that distinction is not universal. The first true blue pigment came from the ancient Egyptians, who invented a synthetic material now known as Egyptian blue around 2200 BCE. It was a mixture of silica, copper, calcium, and an alkali, and it was used to decorate statues, pottery, and jewelry. Yet even in Egypt, where blue was manufactured and clearly understood in an artistic context, the word for blue was not prevalent in everyday language. The color held sacred significance, often associated with the heavens and the divine, but it was not yet part of a broad visual vocabulary. Blue only became more widespread much later, with the extraction of indigo dye from plants in India and the development of ultramarine pigment from the semi-precious stone lapis lazuli imported from Afghanistan. These substances were expensive and rare, used in religious manuscripts and by the wealthy elite, which elevated blue's status as a color of luxury and mysticism. In Europe, the rise of blue as a prominent cultural color occurred during the Middle Ages. Blue began appearing in religious art, especially in depictions of the Virgin Mary, symbolizing purity and celestial grace. By the Renaissance, blue had become one of the primary colors in painting, and the invention of more stable and affordable pigments allowed its spread across clothing, flags, and architecture. Still, it took until the modern period for blue to gain its current psychological associations: calm, trust, sadness, depth, and order. These meanings are relatively new, shaped by centuries of evolving use and increasing familiarity. Today, it's almost impossible to imagine a world without blue. It's one of the most popular favorite colors globally. Yet understanding that blue was a late arrival in the human visual and linguistic landscape reminds us how much of perception is shaped by cultural context and historical development. We tend to think of vision as objective. We see what's there, but vision is filtered through language, shaped by need, attention, and learned categories. The ancient mind did not lack physical vision. It lacked the conceptual framework to isolate blue as a distinct entity. The journey of blue from invisibility to dominance offers a powerful metaphor for how humans develop knowledge. What we think of as obvious is often the product of generations of gradual differentiation, naming, and reinforcement. Just as blue was hidden in plain sight for millennia, other aspects of the world, emotions, ideas, even scientific truths, may await recognition, their clarity dependent on the language and attention we bring to them. The color that wasn't always there is a reminder that we don't just see the world, we learn to see it. At birth, the human body contains around 270 bones. By the time we reach adulthood, that number drops to about 206. It's a curious fact, one that seems to contradict our common sense understanding of growth. We typically think of maturation as an additive process: more cells, larger organs, increasing complexity. But in the case of the skeleton, growing up involves a strange kind of subtraction. Bones disappear, fuse, or change purpose. This hidden transformation is not just a biological quirk. It's a window into how the human body is designed to adapt, streamline, and specialize over time. The reason babies start life with so many bones is because many of them are still works in progress. What appear as single bones in an adult are often made up of several pieces in a newborn. The skull is one of the most obvious examples. In infants, it is composed of multiple separate plates, frontal, parietal, occipital, that haven't yet fused. This isn't a design flaw, it's a brilliant evolutionary adaptation. The separations, known as fontanelles, allow the baby's head to compress during childbirth and give the brain room to grow during those crucial early years. As the child develops, these plates gradually fuse into a solid skull. In this way, fewer bones doesn't mean less complexity. It often means greater structural integrity and efficiency. Other bones in the body go through similar changes. The sacrum, located at the base of the spine, is made up of 5 vertebrae in infants, but these fuse into a single bone in adulthood. The same goes for the coccyx, or tailbone, which begins as several small vertebrae but typically fuses into a single structure. In the hands and feet, small bones called ossification centers form and fuse to create the adult wrist and ankle bones. These changes are tightly choreographed by genetics and developmental signals, and while the final number of bones settles around 206, slight variations between individuals are common. Some people retain small accessory bones, called sesamoid bones, in places like the hands or feet that others do not. These extras are generally harmless, but remind us that the human skeleton is not a fixed blueprint, but a dynamic structure. But why does biology allow, or even require, bones to vanish or merge? Part of the answer lies in the balance between flexibility and strength. In early life, A more fragmented skeleton offers greater pliability, which is essential not only during childbirth, but also during infancy and early childhood when the body needs to be resilient. A baby's bones are not only more numerous, they are also softer, composed largely of cartilage that gradually hardens through a process called ossification. This flexibility protects growing bodies from injury and allows for rapid changes in size and proportion. As growth slows and the demands on the body shift from flexibility to durability, fusion helps to create a more stable and supportive framework. Another part of the answer comes from efficiency. Having bones that fuse over time reduces unnecessary redundancy. An adult doesn't need the same degree of pliability in the spine or skull that a baby does. As those needs change, so does the structure. The transformation reflects an underlying principle of biology. Form follows function. Bones are not static elements. They are living tissues that respond to stress, use, and the needs of the body at different stages of life. The disappearance or fusion of bones is not a loss but a refinement. It's nature's way of optimizing the body for new tasks, standing upright, bearing weight, coordinating complex movements. What's even more fascinating is that this process reveals something about how humans evolved. The skeletal flexibility seen in infants mirrors a broader evolutionary strategy seen in mammals: adaptability. Bones that can fuse or repurpose themselves give organisms a developmental advantage. In some cases, remnants of bones that once had different functions are repurposed entirely. The bones in the middle ear, malleus, incus, and stapes, originated from jawbones in reptilian ancestors. Over time, evolution redirected them to serve a new function: amplifying sound. These kinds of changes show how the skeleton is a living record of adaptation, not a static architecture. The transition from 270 bones to 206 also reminds us that the human body is never finished. We often think of the adult body as a completed project, but in truth, we are always changing. Bones remodel themselves throughout life in response to physical activity, nutrition, and aging. In elderly individuals, bone density can decrease, leading to conditions like osteoporosis. In athletes, certain bones can become denser and more robust due to repeated stress. Even though the number of bones stabilizes in adulthood, their internal structure continues to evolve. Ultimately, the story of our vanishing bones is a story of transformation. It speaks to the incredible complexity and intelligence of biological design. Growth is not just about getting bigger, it's about becoming better suited to the tasks ahead. The fact that we begin life with a surplus of bones that gradually condense and align themselves is a metaphor for human development itself, full of potential, shaped by challenge, and always moving toward integration. We don't usually think about the architecture of our bodies, but every step we take, every object we lift, every breath we draw is made possible by a skeleton that has quietly restructured itself over the years. Beneath the skin, the ghost of our infant selves still lingers, not in the bones that remain, but in the ones that changed, fused, or disappeared along the way. There is a kind of sound that you can't hear, but might still feel deep inside your body. It won't make your ears ring or your chest vibrate in the way loud music might, but it can make your skin crawl, your breath quicken, and your thoughts spiral into anxiety or dread. This is infrasound, low-frequency sound waves that fall below the threshold of human hearing, typically under 20 Hz. Though we cannot consciously detect it, infrasound can profoundly affect the human body and mind. Its strange power to generate discomfort, unease, and even hallucinations has led to its use in everything from psychological experiments and haunted house explanations to controversial military research and architectural design. Infrasound is the sound that bypasses the ears and goes straight to the nerves, and its ability to quietly disturb us challenges what we think we know about perception and reality. Unlike sound in the normal audible range, which can be clearly located and described, infrasound is often felt more than heard. It can travel long distances, pass through walls, and resonate inside the body's cavities. People exposed to it report a range of symptoms: headaches, nausea, panic, disorientation, and overwhelming fear. In some cases, they describe sensations akin to a supernatural presence or being watched. These effects are not imaginary. Studies have shown that infrasound can influence mood, induce anxiety, and even trigger visual distortions. The body is reacting to a disturbance it cannot explain, and the brain scrambles to interpret the sensations, sometimes settling on ghosts, apparitions, or an unshakable feeling that something is terribly wrong. One of the most famous cases linking infrasound to paranormal experiences comes from British engineer Vic Tandy in the 1980s. Working in a lab that was reportedly haunted, Tandy began experiencing chills, blurry vision, and intense unease. One day, he saw a ghostly figure out of the corner of his eye, but as an engineer, he began to question the source. He discovered that a newly installed fan was emitting infrasound at around 19 Hz, close to the resonant frequency of the human eyeball. The vibration was causing subtle distortions in vision and the feelings of fear. Once the fan was removed, the hauntings ceased. This led Tandy and others to explore the idea that infrasound could be responsible for many ghost sightings and haunted house phenomena, suggesting that what we think of as supernatural might be deeply biological. But infrasound is not limited to eerie basements and crumbling castles. It also appears in nature. Large storms, ocean waves, earthquakes, and even the movement of tectonic plates can generate infrasound. Animals like elephants and whales use it to communicate over vast distances. Some researchers believe humans may have once had a more attuned sensitivity to these low frequencies, which could explain why we sometimes feel anxious or uncomfortable before a natural disaster. Our bodies might be picking up signals our conscious minds no longer recognize. These primordial vibrations could trigger a fear response, a relic of survival instincts honed over millennia. The potential for infrasound to alter human psychology has not gone unnoticed in more strategic contexts. There are reports, though often shrouded in secrecy, of military interest in infrasound as a non-lethal weapon. Its ability to disorient and unsettle makes it theoretically useful for crowd control or psychological warfare. Devices have been proposed or even tested that emit low-frequency waves to incapacitate or manipulate people without visible force. Though such weapons remain controversial and often unconfirmed, the very idea taps into deep fears about being controlled or influenced without our knowledge. A sound you can't hear that can make you feel like you're losing your mind is a powerful tool for coercion or deterrence. Architecture, too, has unwittingly or intentionally interacted with infrasound. Certain large buildings, particularly those with tall ceilings, deep basements, or long tunnels, can create infrasound through air movement, mechanical systems, or structural resonance. People visiting such spaces sometimes report feeling unsettled or overwhelmed, and studies have suggested that specific architectural features may enhance these effects. In some modern designs, infrasound is being explored deliberately, not for fear or discomfort, but to create immersive sensory environments, artistic installations, or even therapeutic spaces. But the line between stimulation and disturbance is thin, and harnessing something as unpredictable as infrasound comes with both promise and risk. The mystery of infrasound also challenges how we think about perception. We tend to believe that if we cannot hear, see, or touch something, it cannot affect us. But infrasound reveals the limits of that assumption. It proves that our senses are not perfect detectors, but partial instruments, often filtering or missing inputs that still shape our experience. The idea that we could be influenced by vibrations below the level of awareness forces us to rethink not just what is real, but how we come to believe in it. A haunted house might be nothing more than a poorly ventilated room with a low-frequency hum. A sense of dread might stem not from intuition, but from subsonic pressure on the inner ear, and the feeling of being watched might be the brain's desperate effort to rationalize what the body already feels. Infrasound exists at the edge of perception, both a physical phenomenon and a psychological enigma. It is not inherently dangerous, but its ability to destabilize the mind gives it an almost mythic power. It lives in the background of our world, hidden in wind, machines, and architecture, tapping quietly on the edges of consciousness. Whether used in art, studied in science, or feared in folklore, it remains a potent reminder that not all forces that shape us are visible, audible, or even fully understood. The sound that can break your mind is one you'll never hear, but you might never forget how it made you feel. In the 1970s, a group of medical researchers and computer scientists quietly created a machine that could predict death more accurately than human doctors. At a time when computers were still viewed as specialized tools for math and logistics rather than decision makers, this innovation posed a profound challenge to the medical profession. The algorithm analyzed patient data, vital signs, lab results, diagnostic notes, and produced a probability of death that, while not perfect, was unsettlingly accurate. It could look at a patient's profile and foresee who was likely to die within days or weeks, even when physicians believed the outcome was different. The machine was not dramatic. It didn't involve blinking lights or whirring servers. It was a statistical model running on a mainframe, quietly tallying variables and churning out answers that no one wanted to hear. Despite its effectiveness, the project didn't revolutionize healthcare. Instead, it was buried, met not with celebration, but with discomfort, resistance, and silence. The reasons for this quiet burial were complex. On one hand, the algorithm worked. It often outperformed trained physicians in identifying critical patients whose conditions were more serious than they appeared. In retrospective analysis, it could show where human bias, emotion, or overconfidence had clouded judgment. But it also violated the foundational assumptions of the medical profession. Doctors are trained not only to treat, but to give hope. Predicting death with cold certainty undermined that role. It threatened to reframe the physician from a healer into a passive observer, standing helpless while a machine made grim calculations. There was something disturbing about an algorithm that could so clinically predict a person's end, without empathy, without bedside manner, without any of the rituals that soften the approach of death. Moreover, the tool raised ethical concerns that had no easy answers. If a machine says a patient will die, what is a hospital supposed to do with that information? Should treatment plans change? Should the patient be told? Does the prediction become a self-fulfilling prophecy? In the 1970s, bioethics was still a developing field. End-of-life care was rarely discussed openly, and patient autonomy was not as robustly defended as it is today. The algorithm posed questions the system was not ready to confront. It forced uncomfortable conversations about resource allocation, futility of care, and the limits of human agency. Rather than integrate the machine into clinical practice, administrators and physicians allowed it to fade into obscurity, its results acknowledged but never acted upon. The project was not completely forgotten. In academic circles, it lingered as a case study in the intersection of medicine and technology. Over the decades, as computing power grew and the digital age reshaped every field, the spirit of that early algorithm resurfaced in different forms. Today, machine learning and artificial intelligence are used to predict hospital readmissions, identify high-risk patients, and even forecast disease outbreaks. Algorithms are everywhere in medicine now, guiding treatment paths, flagging anomalies in scans, and offering second opinions at scale. But the unease remains. The idea of a machine that can predict death continues to evoke deep resistance, both from within the profession and from the public. People want expertise from doctors, not verdicts from computers. Yet the original project from the 1970s may have been ahead of its time, not just technologically, but philosophically. It recognized that death is part of the medical landscape, not just a failure or an end point, but a reality to be anticipated and, in some cases, prepared for. Today, palliative care teams and hospice services often work with prognostic tools to guide conversations about end-of-life options. But these tools are still used cautiously. Predicting death remains taboo, especially when the prediction feels cold and algorithmic, rather than empathetic and human. The ghost of that early machine still haunts these efforts, a reminder of how powerful and how dangerous knowledge can be. There's also the question of accuracy. No machine is perfect. The early algorithm had a better track record than many clinicians, but it still got things wrong. False positives could lead to withdrawing care too early. False negatives could inspire misplaced hope. In both cases, the emotional toll on patients and families is immense. Even today, predictive models are framed in terms of probabilities, not certainties. The human element, intuition, conversation, experience, still has a place, even if the data is powerful. But the mere existence of a system that sees death coming more clearly than most people can has changed the way we think about prognosis, autonomy, and the role of machines in medicine. In a way, the machine that predicted death wasn't buried because it failed. It was buried because it worked. It worked too well. It saw through the hopeful distortions, the desperate optimism, and the blind spots of human judgment, and it offered an uncomfortable truth, that sometimes the end is visible, measurable, and inevitable. For a profession built on fighting that end, this was a difficult truth to accept. But perhaps that machine left a legacy not in hospital protocols or treatment plans, but in the questions it forced us to ask. What do we do with knowledge we don't want? How do we weigh precision against compassion? And can a prediction be useful even if we're afraid to hear it? The quiet end of that early algorithm speaks volumes about the relationship between humans and machines, especially when mortality is involved. We like our tools to help us live, not tell us when we will die. But as technology advances, we may be forced to revisit those early calculations and find a place for their uncomfortable wisdom. The machine didn't break medicine. It revealed something medicine still struggles to accept, that knowing is not always healing, and sometimes silence is a choice. When we think about memory, we often imagine a kind of internal video recorder, faithfully capturing our lives moment by moment and storing those recordings for later playback. We like to believe that when we remember an event from childhood, a birthday party, a first day at school, a conversation with a parent, we are accessing a file, unchanged and waiting, exactly as it was. But this comforting idea doesn't align with how memory actually works. Neuroscience and psychology have revealed something far more complex and unsettling. Memory is not a recording, it's a reconstruction. Every time we recall a memory, we rebuild it. We draw on fragments, sensory impressions, emotions, bits of narrative, and piece them together in real time. In doing so, we may slightly change the memory without realizing it. Over time, those small changes accumulate, and the memory we think of as fixed becomes something more like a story we've edited, rewritten, and retold until it barely resembles the original. This phenomenon is not a flaw of memory, it's a feature. Our brains are not designed to store perfect records of the past. Instead, they are designed to be efficient, flexible, and adaptive. Memory helps us make decisions in the present and prepare for the future. To do that, it has to be dynamic. When we remember, we are engaging a complex network of brain regions, including the hippocampus and prefrontal cortex, which retrieve, interpret, and reassemble information in a way that fits the current context. In the process, the brain may fill in gaps, smooth over inconsistencies, or update the emotional tone of the memory based on new experiences. We don't notice these changes because the memory still feels vivid and real, but its truthfulness is never guaranteed. Studies in cognitive psychology have shown how malleable memory really is. In one famous experiment, psychologist Elizabeth Loftus demonstrated that simply changing the wording of a question can alter what people remember about an event. Participants who watched a video of a car crash and were asked how fast the cars were going when they smashed into each other reported higher speeds and more damage than those asked when the cars bumped. Some even recalled seeing broken glass that wasn't there. These distortions occurred after just a single exposure and a single question. Over time, and with repeated recollection, the effect becomes even stronger. Our memories can be influenced by suggestion, by other people's stories, and even by our own beliefs and expectations. Childhood memories are particularly vulnerable to this reconstructive process. Because children have limited language and cognitive skills, their early experiences are often stored in fragmented or emotional terms. As we grow older and try to make sense of those early moments, we tend to reframe them through the lens of adult understanding. We assign motives, draw conclusions, or add context that wasn't available at the time. A confusing or ambiguous event may later be remembered as traumatic or joyful, depending on what we've learned or how our feelings about it have changed. In some cases, people develop false memories, vivid recollections of events that never happened at all. These memories can feel just as real as genuine ones, because the brain treats reconstructed memories the same way it treats more accurate ones. This fluidity can be unsettling. If our memories are constantly shifting, how do we trust our own past? How do we build identity, which relies so heavily on a consistent personal narrative? The answer may lie in rethinking what memory is for. Rather than being a static archive, memory is more like a storytelling tool. It's a way of shaping the chaos of experience into coherence. We remember selectively and interpretively because doing so helps us understand who we are. Our memory isn't about preserving the past, it's about giving meaning to it. We create continuity not by remembering everything, but by remembering what fits the story we need to tell. This understanding also opens the door to compassion and change. If memory is flexible, then so is identity. People can let go of painful narratives, reframe old wounds, or reinterpret past mistakes. Therapies like cognitive behavioral therapy and EMDR, eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, work in part by helping people change how they remember traumatic events, not erasing the memory, but changing its emotional power. Even on a personal level, reflecting differently on a past event can lead to healing. You might recall a difficult moment and with time and new perspective, come to see strength where you once saw only failure. At the same time, the reconstructive nature of memory calls for caution. Eyewitness testimony, once considered gold standard evidence in courts, is now known to be deeply unreliable. Two people can witness the same event and walk away with entirely different recollections, each convinced they are right. The justice system, educational institutions, and even our interpersonal relationships need to account for the fact that what feels true in memory may not be historically accurate. Our memories are more like palimpsests than pristine pages, layered, edited, and reinterpreted with each telling. This doesn't make them worthless. On the contrary, it makes them deeply human. The stories we tell ourselves shape how we live, how we love, how we grow. Every time you remember something from your past, you're not just recalling it, you're recreating it. And in that act of recreation, you're also deciding who you are. Memory is not a recording, it's a mirror, a canvas, and sometimes a doorway into becoming someone new. Every 14 days, somewhere in the world, a language disappears. It vanishes not with fanfare, but with a quiet final conversation, a story told for the last time, a lullaby sung to no one who will remember the words. When the last speaker of a language dies, an entire worldview often dies with them. This is not just the loss of a communication tool, it is the extinction of a cultural ecosystem, one built over centuries or millennia, shaped by geography, survival, spirituality, kinship, and memory. Currently, linguists estimate that of the approximately 7,000 languages spoken around the world today, nearly half are at risk of disappearing within the next century. Some estimates are even more dire. And while languages have always risen and fallen throughout human history, the current pace and scale of extinction is unprecedented. What makes this loss so profound is that each language encodes more than vocabulary and grammar. It holds a unique way of understanding the world. Language shapes thought, even subtly. It directs attention, encodes memory, and frames what is considered meaningful. For instance, some languages have words for experiences or relationships that no other language can express concisely. Others have grammatical structures that force speakers to think differently about time, space, or causality. In Cook Thayor, an indigenous Australian language, speakers use cardinal directions rather than left or right to describe position. As a result, they are almost always oriented to the compass points. In some Amazonian languages, there are no specific words for numbers beyond 2 or 3. These cultures have developed sophisticated systems of estimation and value without quantification. When these languages disappear, so too do the intellectual traditions and survival strategies they contain. Language is also deeply personal. It is the medium through which people learn lullabies, jokes, curses, prayers, and love. It carries stories that are often unwritten and sacred, passed from generation to generation in oral form. In many indigenous cultures, language is the core of identity, tied to ancestry, land, and community. Losing a language is not only a linguistic shift, but a cultural rupture. It can sever younger generations from their roots, and it can leave elders without a way to express the deepest parts of their knowledge and identity. Revitalizing a language, then, is not just an academic project. It is an act of cultural survival and resistance. The reasons languages die are complex and often tied to broader patterns of domination, globalization, and assimilation. Colonialism played a devastating role in language loss. Across the Americas, Africa, and Asia, colonial powers imposed their own languages while punishing or forbidding native ones. In residential schools in Canada and the United States, Indigenous children were beaten or shamed for speaking their mother tongues. In Australia, Aboriginal languages were banned in schools and missions. These policies were not accidental. They were tools of cultural erasure, designed to break the continuity of identity and to assimilate people into dominant norms. The legacy of these systems is still felt today in the fragility of many endangered languages. Modern forces continue the trend. Globalization has made a handful of languages, like English, Mandarin, Spanish, and Arabic, economically and socially dominant. Mass media, education, and technology often prioritize these global languages, leaving minority tongues with little space to grow or even survive. Parents may choose to teach their children only the dominant language to improve their chances of success. Communities faced with poverty or marginalization may begin to see their own languages as obsolete or backward. The pressure to conform is immense, and the cost is often the quiet abandonment of linguistic heritage. Despite the bleakness, there is also hope. Around the world, communities and linguists are fighting to preserve and revitalize endangered languages. Language nests, where children are immersed in their ancestral language from a young age, have had success in places like New Zealand with the Maori language and in Hawaii with Hawaiian. Documentation efforts are underway in remote areas, with linguists working to record vocabularies, grammar, and oral histories before the last speakers pass on. Technology, once a threat, is also becoming a tool for preservation. Apps, online dictionaries, and audio recordings can help bring endangered languages into the digital age. Social media, in particular, allows speakers of rare languages to connect, share, and create content in their native tongues. However, these efforts are often underfunded and politically unsupported. Language revitalization is hard, slow work that requires not just linguistic skill, but community involvement, education policy reform, and a shift in cultural attitudes. It demands recognition that linguistic diversity is not just a cultural artifact, but a living, breathing part of human civilization worth protecting. Language is not just about speaking, it's about being. It is about how people see the stars, describe the seasons, relate to ancestors, and understand the spirit world. It is about naming the land and being named by it. Each language that disappears reduces the palette of human expression. It narrows the possibilities of thought and imagination. When we lose a language, we lose not just what it says, but how it sees. We lose metaphors and myths, humor and wisdom, alternative ways of being human. The extinction of languages is not a natural process. It is a consequence of choices, policies, and power, but it is not irreversible. With enough effort, languages can return from the brink. They can be sung again, spoken by children, woven back into daily life. In the end, the story of language loss is also a story about what we value. It asks us whether we believe diversity matters, not just in biology or politics, but in thought, sound, and meaning. It challenges us to listen more carefully, to honor the voices that are fading, and to act before they are silenced forever. One language dies every 2 weeks, but perhaps with attention and care, one can be saved just as often. Nikola Tesla, once hailed as one of the greatest minds of his generation, died penniless and alone in a New York hotel room in 1943. A man who envisioned the future in ways no one else could, Tesla lived and died in the space between genius and tragedy. Today, he is often celebrated as the unsung hero of modern electricity, the man who gave the world alternating current, radio waves, wireless communication, and robotics. Yet during his lifetime, he was largely misunderstood, dismissed, and increasingly marginalized by the very society that benefited from his ideas. Toward the end of his life, he slipped into obscurity, his mind drifting into obsessions with invisible forces, pigeons, and extraterrestrial contact, while many of his most ambitious ideas either remained unbuilt or were quietly swept into classified files, lost in the shadows of history. Tesla's brilliance was apparent early in his life. Born in 1856 in what is now Croatia, he displayed an extraordinary memory and a capacity for visualizing mechanical designs in perfect detail. His early education in engineering was marked by both obsession and rebellion. He often clashed with teachers and struggled to conform to academic expectations. But his mind was a forge of constant invention. He arrived in the United States in 1884 with little more than a letter of introduction to Thomas Edison and a head full of revolutionary ideas. The partnership between Tesla and Edison was short-lived and ultimately adversarial. Tesla's advocacy for alternating current, a more efficient system for transmitting electricity, threatened Edison's investments in direct current, sparking a bitter and very public technological feud known as the War of the Currents. Despite this, Tesla's alternating current system won out and became the standard for electrical power, changing the world. But victory brought him little stability. Although Tesla was capable of stunning intellectual feats, he lacked the business acumen of his contemporaries. While inventors like Edison and industrialists like Westinghouse and J.P. Morgan built empires, Tesla lost control of his patents, fell into debt, and watched others profit from his visions. Over the years, he filed hundreds of patents, many for ideas that were decades ahead of their time, but his ability to turn them into practical or commercial successes was limited. He once lit 200 lamps wirelessly in a demonstration in Colorado Springs, and he believed in the potential to transmit energy through the air across vast distances, a concept that modern wireless technology has only begun to explore. But investors were skeptical, particularly when Tesla began focusing less on marketable inventions and more on global projects, like his dream of free wireless energy for all. His Wardenclyffe Tower, an enormous transmitter built on Long Island, was meant to be the first step toward worldwide wireless communication and power distribution. It was a monument to imagination and idealism, but it was never completed. Funding dried up, support faded, and the tower was eventually dismantled. As Tesla grew older, his behavior became increasingly erratic. He developed a strong attachment to pigeons, often feeding them in parks and claiming to have fallen in love with one particular bird. He began to speak of contact with extraterrestrials and strange vibrations that only he could perceive. Many dismissed these ideas as the ramblings of a man who had lost touch with reality, but others have speculated that Tesla may have been suffering from obsessive-compulsive disorder, or even a form of undiagnosed autism, conditions not understood at the time. Despite his isolation and eccentricities, Tesla continued to invent, write, and propose ideas until his death. Some of these ideas remain tantalizing and mysterious, including his theories about death rays and directed energy weapons. Tesla claimed to have created a device capable of shooting focused beams of energy that could bring down planes and stop armies, a concept echoed decades later in the development of modern military technology. Whether these devices were ever truly built, or whether Tesla's plans were confiscated or buried, remains a topic of speculation and conspiracy. What is known is that after his death, government agents reportedly entered his hotel room and seized boxes of papers, some of which have never been released to the public. Tesla's tragedy was not that he was wrong, but that he was too far ahead. He saw the world not as it was, but as it could be. He dreamed of wireless power, global communication, robotic automation, and clean energy long before the world had the tools or imagination to realize those visions. He operated outside the systems of power, business, and academic legitimacy, which left him vulnerable to financial ruin and professional exile. In many ways, he was a man displaced in time, a prophet of a future no one else could yet see. His inventions continue to inspire scientists, engineers, and artists alike. His name has become a symbol of visionary innovation, now emblazoned on electric cars and echoed in popular culture. But during his lifetime, he was rarely celebrated, and when he died, it was in relative obscurity, accompanied only by his birds and his unfinished dreams. The tragedy of Nikola Tesla is not merely that he died poor or that his mental health deteriorated. It is that society often fails to protect, understand, or reward its most original minds. He was not just a scientist, but a philosopher, a futurist, and a mystic whose ideas challenge the boundaries between science and imagination. He reminds us that progress is not always linear, and that the future often begins in the lonely thoughts of someone the world isn't ready for. Tesla's silence was not from lack of ideas, but from a world that stopped listening. Yet his work speaks still, humming through our wires, floating in our signals, waiting, perhaps, for more of his lost inventions to be rediscovered. The universe is not silent. It hums, roars, pulses, and sings, but not in the way we might expect. In the vacuum of space, there is no air to carry sound as we know it, no waves of pressure bouncing between molecules like those that travel through Earth's atmosphere to reach our ears. Yet in the cold expanse between stars and planets, vibration still exists. Magnetic fields, plasma waves, radio emissions, all these forces ripple and dance through the cosmos. NASA, using instruments aboard spacecraft like Voyager and Cassini, has captured these energetic vibrations and translated them into sound waves that we can hear. The result is eerie and haunting. Each planet has its own voice, a distinct tonal fingerprint that speaks of its atmosphere, magnetic field, and position in the solar symphony. Listening to them can shake your understanding of silence, because what we often imagine as the great quiet of space is, in fact, a complex and dynamic chorus. These planetary songs are made possible through a process known as data sonification. Instruments onboard space probes detect electromagnetic fluctuations, vibrations in electric and magnetic fields rather than in air. While we cannot hear these vibrations directly, scientists can convert them into audible sound by mapping the frequencies onto a range the human ear can detect. This isn't just a creative flourish. It allows researchers to study complex patterns in the data in new ways, and for ordinary people, it offers a way to connect emotionally with a universe that often feels too vast and cold to grasp. These sounds are not simulations. They are real recordings of the energetic environments around the planets, translated into a register we can comprehend. Jupiter, for example, emits a deep, rumbling growl laced with crackles and electronic hisses. These are caused by the interactions between its massive magnetic field and charged particles in its atmosphere and radiation belts. Saturn produces tones that resemble ghostly winds and distant thunder. Neptune sings a long, low whistle, while Uranus hums with a sharp, steady frequency. Even our own Earth, when recorded from space, produces a symphony of low, rhythmic pulses and rising squeals, known as chorus waves, caused by electrons spiraling along magnetic field lines. Each of these voices tells a story, not just of physical characteristics, but of constant motion, of energy exchanging form, of cosmic forces beyond human control. Perhaps most remarkable is how emotional these sounds can feel. Jupiter's growl feels ominous and grand, befitting its status as the giant of the solar system. Saturn's eerie tones evoke mystery and distance. The delicate clicks and hums of Earth sound almost familiar, like a reminder that our planet, too, is a participant in this celestial orchestra. Listening to these planetary sounds creates a strange intimacy with distant worlds. It turns cold data into a sensory experience, letting you hear the unseen and feel a connection to places billions of miles away. What once seemed like lifeless orbs in the sky become characters, each with its own voice and mood. The idea that the universe has a sound is not new. The ancient Greeks imagined the music of the spheres, a celestial harmony created by the movement of the planets through the heavens. They believed this music was too perfect for human ears to detect, a divine song that shaped the order of the cosmos. In a strange way, modern space sonification brings us closer to that ancient idea. We now know that planetary orbits don't literally produce sound, but the universe does vibrate, and those vibrations can be translated into tones. What the Greeks imagined through philosophy and mathematics, we now experience through science and technology. These planetary voices also offer a new way to think about silence. In space, where no air exists to carry sound, silence isn't the absence of activity. It's just a different kind of soundscape, one that requires different senses to perceive. When we picture astronauts floating in silence, it's true they wouldn't hear much through their ears, but all around them, the universe is alive with activity. It reminds us that silence is often a matter of perspective. Just because we can't hear something doesn't mean it isn't there. The cosmos is always speaking. We just need the right tools to listen. This experience can also be humbling. Hearing the voices of planets and stars puts human noise into context. Our everyday sounds, engines, conversations, music, alarms, feel momentarily small and fragile when compared to the stately, slow-motion symphonies of planetary magnetospheres. It shifts your sense of scale. It expands your definition of sound. It blurs the line between science and art, fact and feeling. And it suggests that perhaps the universe isn't silent at all, but simply waiting for us to learn how to hear it. NASA has made many of these recordings available to the public, and listening to them is like eavesdropping on the cosmos. There is no melody in the conventional sense, no rhythm designed to please human ears, and yet the experience is deeply musical, full of tone, structure, and emotion. For scientists, these sounds reveal insights into the composition and behavior of planets. For everyone else, they are a doorway into wonder. They are a reminder that we are not alone on a mute rock floating in darkness. We are participants in a larger vibration, connected through the very forces that shape stars and scatter galaxies. In a world often overwhelmed by artificial noise, the sound of the universe offers something different. It is not designed, it is not planned, it simply is, raw, ancient, and endlessly unfolding. To listen to it is to encounter a kind of truth that transcends language, a truth that sounds like silence until you learn how to hear. When you look in the mirror, you see a human being, flesh, bone, thought, emotion. You think of yourself as a singular person, defined by your DNA, your memories, your choices. But biologically, this sense of singularity is something of an illusion. Your body is home to trillions of microorganisms, bacteria, viruses, fungi, and archaea that together outnumber your own human cells. For every human cell in your body, there may be as many as 1.3 microbial cells. Even more astonishing is that your body contains far more microbial genes than human ones. You are, in a very real sense, a walking ecosystem, a superorganism whose health, behavior, and even thoughts are shaped by genetic code that is not your own. This vast collection of non-human life is called the human microbiome. It lives in your gut, on your skin, in your mouth, your lungs, and even in places long thought to be sterile, like the placenta or the brain's outer membranes. These organisms aren't just passive hitchhikers. They're deeply involved in your biology. They help digest food, synthesize vitamins, train your immune system, and protect against harmful invaders. In many cases, they do things your human cells can't. Your microbiome is not just a biological supplement. It is an integral part of what makes you function. Nowhere is this more striking than in the gut-brain connection. The microbes in your intestines, collectively known as the gut microbiota, produce neurotransmitters, modulate inflammation, and send signals along the vagus nerve directly to the brain. Research has shown that changes in gut bacteria can influence mood, anxiety, cognition, and even behavior. Experiments with mice have demonstrated that transplanting gut bacteria from anxious mice into calm ones can induce anxious behavior in the recipients. Similarly, altering a mouse's microbiome can change its social tendencies or cognitive flexibility. This raises the astonishing possibility that some of what we consider personality, our moods, impulses, and patterns of thought, may be partly shaped by microscopic organisms with no consciousness or intent. In humans, emerging studies have linked the microbiome to conditions ranging from depression and autism to Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's. While the science is still in its early stages, the idea is clear. The boundary between brain and body, between human and non-human, is more porous than we once thought. Your mental state may not be just a product of your neurons, but also of your bacteria. Your sense of self might not arise solely from your DNA, but from a dynamic, symbiotic network of living things that cohabitate your body. The implications are profound. It challenges the notion of a self-contained self. If parts of your personality, your cravings, your emotional balance are co-authored by microbes, then who are you really? Where does your identity begin and end? This is not just a philosophical question, it has practical consequences. Treatments for mental illness, metabolic disorders, autoimmune diseases, and even cancer are now exploring microbiome-targeted approaches. Fecal transplants, probiotics, and diet-based therapies aim to restore microbial balance, not just for digestive health, but for whole body and even psychological wellness. At the genetic level, the disparity is even more staggering. While the human genome contains about 20,000 genes, the collective microbiome is estimated to have over 2 million. This vast reservoir of genetic material vastly expands the biochemical capabilities of your body. It allows for flexibility, adaptation, and resilience. Your microbiome changes throughout your life, shaped by birth method, diet, environment, antibiotic use, and countless other factors. It is a dynamic, evolving code that interacts constantly with your own genome. In essence, you are a hybrid, part human, part microbial. Your very biology dependent on cooperation between species, and yet we rarely think of ourselves this way. The narrative of individualism, of a discrete, autonomous self, is so strong that we overlook the evidence of our biological multiplicity. But once you start seeing the body as an ecosystem, everything changes. Illness becomes not just a personal failing or genetic destiny, but a disruption in ecological balance. Health is not just the absence of disease, but the harmonious coexistence of diverse life forms. You are not a machine made of human parts. You are a rainforest, teeming with life, each organism playing a role in the whole. This perspective also opens up a new kind of humility. It reveals that we are not as self-determined as we like to think. Our thoughts and feelings are not sealed off from the microscopic world. They are embedded in it. The decisions we make, the foods we crave, the energy we feel might all be influenced by organisms we cannot see and rarely consider. We are not captains of our biology, but stewards of a complex internal world. Even the idea of your brain becomes more complex in this light. While the brain is the command center, it is not sealed off. It is porous, metabolically intertwined with the body. Microbial metabolites cross the blood-brain barrier. Immune signals shaped by gut bacteria reach the brain. Your thoughts emerge, not just from neurons firing, but from a cascade of interactions that begin in your intestines and ripple outward. In this light, the self becomes less like a fortress and more like a coral reef, made up of many living things, shaped by environment, sustained through relationships. The code in your brain is not just human DNA, it is microbial DNA. It is chemical messages from gut bacteria. It is a chorus of life forms that together create what you experience as you. Understanding this doesn't diminish human identity. It enriches it. It shows that we are not alone, even within our own bodies. We are ecosystems of staggering complexity, cooperation, and adaptability, and recognizing that can change how we approach health, how we understand the mind, and how we see ourselves, not as isolated individuals, but as living collectives. When you look at the Canisa triangle, you see a white equilateral triangle pointing upward. It appears to hover atop 3 black circles with wedges cut out and 3 black angles that form the suggestion of another triangle pointing downward. But here's the catch. The central white triangle doesn't actually exist. There are no lines outlining it, no boundaries defining its shape. Your brain constructs it from suggestion, completing the image with such confidence that you'd swear it's really there. This illusion, first described by Italian psychologist Gaetano Canizza in 1955, is a striking demonstration of how the brain doesn't just perceive the world, it invents it. What we see isn't always a direct reflection of reality, but a carefully crafted simulation built from limited input and prior expectation. The Canisa triangle is part of a broad category of visual illusions that reveal the constructive nature of perception. Rather than passively receiving visual information, the brain actively interprets and organizes it to form coherent shapes, patterns, and meanings. In the case of the Canisa triangle, the brain prefers to see familiar, complete objects rather than fragmented, ambiguous ones. It fills in the gaps and enhances the contrast at the edges, creating the illusion of contours that don't physically exist. This phenomenon is known as illusory contours, edges perceived in the absence of a gradient or border. It's a vivid example of the brain's tendency to infer, guess, and assemble the world from incomplete data. This filling-in process is a core part of how we navigate everyday life. Our eyes take in a vast amount of visual information, but our brains filter, prioritize, and reconstruct what matters most. This makes perception fast and efficient, but also vulnerable to errors. Illusions like the Theseus triangle don't trick a flawed visual system. They reveal a system working exactly as it should. The brain has evolved to make sense of the world with minimal information, drawing on experience and context to complete the picture. This is usually helpful, but can sometimes lead us to see things that aren't really there. Other illusions push this concept even further. The Müller-Lyer illusion makes two identical lines appear to be different lengths depending on the direction of the arrowheads at each end. The Ebbinghaus illusion causes a circle to appear larger or smaller depending on the size of surrounding circles. These are not simply optical quirks. They're demonstrations of how context alters perception. In the real world, we rely on these contextual cues to gauge distance, size, and depth. The brain interprets visual input through assumptions about light, shadow, perspective, and prior experience, often leading to quick but flawed conclusions. Beyond simple shapes, the brain also invents motion, faces, and meaning where none exist. The phi phenomenon, for instance, creates the illusion of movement from a series of static images, a principle behind animation and film. Pareidolia causes us to see faces in clouds, tree bark, or inanimate objects, a result of the brain's strong face detection circuitry. We are hardwired to find patterns, especially ones related to survival and social interaction. This drive to organize the chaotic sensory world into meaningful units is what allows us to function in complex environments. But it also means we are constantly constructing, not just observing. Even perception of color and light is subject to this manipulation. The famous dress photograph that some people saw as white and gold, and others as blue and black, illustrates how the brain adjusts for lighting conditions based on assumptions. Similarly, in shadow illusions like the checker shadow illusion, two squares of the same color appear different due to their surrounding context and our brain's expectations about light and shadow. These examples underline a profound truth. Seeing is not believing. Our experience of the visual world is a synthesis of input and interpretation, a best guess made on the fly. This idea has implications far beyond psychology. In philosophy, it raises questions about reality itself. If our perceptions are reconstructed interpretations, then what can we truly know about the world? Are we ever perceiving things as they are, or just as our brain lets us? Neuroscience has increasingly embraced the concept of predictive processing, the theory that the brain constantly generates predictions about incoming sensory data and then adjusts based on the difference between expectation and input. In this model, perception is not a bottom-up process, but a top-down one. We see what we expect to see, and only correct that vision when reality sharply contradicts it. The Theseus triangle, then, is more than a clever illusion. It is a glimpse into how the mind creates coherence out of ambiguity. It shows that our sense of reality is not passive reception, but active construction. What we experience as the world is, in fact, a blend of sensation, memory, expectation, and interpretation. In most cases, this system serves us well. It allows us to recognize objects quickly, navigate space efficiently, and make decisions rapidly. But it also means we are prone to illusions, not just visual ones, but cognitive and emotional ones too. We fill in gaps in stories, assign motives to others, and interpret ambiguous situations through the lens of our past experiences. The same brain that sees triangles that aren't there also jumps to conclusions and constructs narratives. Understanding the nature of perception can foster humility. It reminds us that our version of reality is just that, a version. It may differ from someone else's, and it may not always be accurate. The brain's powers of construction are impressive, but they are not infallible. Illusions like the Canisa triangle are not just puzzles or curiosities. They are invitations to explore the architecture of the mind, to question the solidity of what we think we see, and to recognize that perception is not a window but a mirror, showing us as much about ourselves as about the world we inhabit. Time is something we all experience, yet few of us ever question its constancy. We assume that seconds tick by uniformly, whether we're climbing a mountain, flying on a plane, or standing still. But the universe doesn't work that way. Time, as it turns out, is not a fixed backdrop to our lives. It's a flexible dimension, warped by speed and gravity. This isn't just abstract theory. Time dilation, a concept born from Einstein's theory of relativity, is a measurable, observable phenomenon. Astronauts aboard the International Space Station age ever so slightly slower than those on Earth. GPS satellites require constant adjustments because their onboard clocks tick differently than those at sea level. Time really does move at different speeds, depending on where you are and how fast you're moving. Einstein's theory of relativity fundamentally changed our understanding of time. According to special relativity, time slows down for an object in motion relative to a stationary observer. The faster the object moves, the more pronounced the effect. In general relativity, Einstein added another twist. Gravity also affects the flow of time. The stronger the gravitational field, the slower time passes. This means that clocks on Earth's surface tick more slowly than clocks at higher altitudes, where gravity is weaker. Both forms of time dilation, due to velocity and gravity, have been confirmed countless times through experiments and are essential to the functioning of modern technology. One of the clearest demonstrations of time dilation comes from GPS technology. GPS satellites orbit about 20,000 kilometers above the Earth and travel at speeds of around 14,000 kilometers per hour. Due to their altitude and velocity, time passes differently for them than it does for people on Earth. Special relativity predicts that their high speed causes their clocks to tick more slowly. Meanwhile, general relativity says that being farther from Earth's gravitational pull causes their clocks to tick faster. The combined effect is that the clocks on GPS satellites gain about 38 microseconds per day compared to clocks on the ground. This might seem negligible, but in GPS systems, even tiny errors in timing can translate into major navigational inaccuracies. Without correcting for time dilation, GPS would be off by several kilometers each day. So every single day, our devices account for relativity to tell us where we are. Experiments have gone further to show time dilation on a human scale. In 1971, physicists placed atomic clocks on commercial airliners and flew them around the world, comparing them to synchronized clocks left on the ground. When the clocks were reunited, the flying clocks had experienced time slightly differently, in line with relativistic predictions. The differences were minuscule, fractions of a microsecond, but measurable. Since then, even more precise experiments using atomic clocks and satellites have repeatedly confirmed the effects. Perhaps the most dramatic real-world example involves astronauts. The International Space Station orbits Earth at roughly 28,000 kilometers per hour. At that speed, time moves slightly slower for those aboard compared to people on the surface. Over the course of a 6-month mission, the difference amounts to just a few milliseconds, but it accumulates. Astronauts age just a bit more slowly than their Earth-bound counterparts. It's not a science fiction plot, it's physics. And while the effect is small with current speeds, it grows significantly at velocities closer to the speed of light. In theory, an astronaut traveling at near-light speed could experience only a few years while centuries pass on Earth. Time travel into the future, in this sense, is entirely possible within the laws of physics. These realities are not limited to outer space or high-tech labs. Even on Earth, elevation can impact time. Studies with ultra-precise atomic clocks have shown that a clock placed on a shelf just 1 foot higher than another will tick faster. At the summit of Mount Everest, time moves slightly faster than at sea level. The differences are imperceptible to us without instruments, but they are real. The higher you go, the less gravity slows you down. So technically, your head is aging faster than your feet. All of this redefines how we think about time. It's not an absolute river flowing equally for everyone everywhere. It bends and flexes with speed and gravity, intertwining with space to create what physicists call space-time. It means that events can appear to happen at different times, depending on the observer's frame of reference. In one frame, 2 things might happen simultaneously. In another, one might clearly happen before the other. The concept of now becomes slippery when you realize that simultaneity itself is relative. The universe does not agree on a single clock. Time dilation also challenges our intuitive understanding of aging, motion, and causality. It invites us to consider that our experience of time is deeply local, shaped by our specific path through space and the gravity around us. We are all time travelers, moving at slightly different rates depending on where we stand and how we move. This adds a poetic dimension to everyday life. It means that 2 people living side by side, yet walking slightly different paths or occupying slightly different altitudes, are not experiencing the exact same time. Their clocks drift, if only by nanoseconds, a quiet but constant divergence. So the next time your phone uses GPS to find a restaurant, or you look up at the night sky and imagine astronauts circling above, remember that time is not ticking equally for everyone. The astronaut, the satellite, the person on the mountain, they're all aging at slightly different speeds. Time dilation isn't a theoretical curiosity. It's a measurable, living part of our reality. The universe keeps time, but not by a single metronome. Instead, it offers a symphony of shifting tempos, where every movement and every mass adds its own rhythm to the music of time. In 1931, a young Austrian logician named Kurt Gödel quietly published 2 theorems that would shake the foundations of mathematics, logic, and philosophy. These became known as Gödel's incompleteness theorems, and they revealed a truth so unsettling that even Albert Einstein was said to have found comfort in Gödel's company late in life. The theorems proved that in any sufficiently powerful formal mathematical system, one capable of doing basic arithmetic, there are true statements that cannot be proven within that system. No matter how complete or well-structured the system is, it will always contain gaps, puzzles that cannot be solved, truths that cannot be proven, and rules that cannot be derived from within. Gödel showed that mathematics, the very language we use to define logic, certainty, and consistency, cannot fully explain itself. To grasp the depth of what Gödel proved, it helps to understand the context in which he was working. At the time, many mathematicians and philosophers believed that all of mathematics could be reduced to a set of axioms, basic truths, and from those, every mathematical truth could be derived logically. This was the dream of David Hilbert, one of the leading mathematicians of the era. Hilbert wanted to build a complete, consistent, and decidable foundation for all of mathematics, a system where every true mathematical statement could be proven by applying rules to the axioms, and every false one could be refuted. This was known as the formalist program, and it aimed to bring the certainty of geometry and arithmetic to the entire mathematical universe. Gödel's first incompleteness theorem shattered that dream. It showed that in any consistent formal system rich enough to express arithmetic, there exist statements that are true but unprovable within the system. These are not ambiguous or meaningless statements. They are perfectly well-formed, meaningful mathematical truths that simply cannot be derived using the system's own rules. Gödel did this by using a kind of self-reference, similar to the paradox of the liar who says, "This statement is false. If it's true, then it must be false. If it's false, then it must be true." Gödel encoded a version of this paradox within arithmetic itself, constructing a statement that essentially says, "This statement is not provable within this system. If the system could prove the statement, it would be inconsistent, proving a falsehood. If it couldn't prove it, then the statement would be true, but unprovable. Either way, the system was incomplete." The second incompleteness theorem went even further. It showed that no consistent system can prove its own consistency. In other words, a mathematical system cannot use its own rules to guarantee that its rules will never lead to contradiction. This was especially devastating because it meant that we cannot fully trust any formal system of mathematics to be both complete and consistent without appealing to something outside of that system. There is always a shadow, always a question that remains unanswered, always a piece of the puzzle missing. The implications of Gödel's theorems are profound and far-reaching. They tell us that certainty, at least in the realm of formal logic and mathematics, has limits. There are always truths that lie beyond proof, always questions that cannot be settled by calculation or derivation alone. This doesn't mean that mathematics is broken or useless. It remains incredibly powerful and predictive, but it does mean that its foundations are not as absolute as once hoped. Every logical structure has an edge beyond which it cannot see, a horizon it cannot cross. Gödel's ideas ripple far beyond mathematics. In computer science, they intersect with the limits of computation. Alan Turing, influenced by Gödel, proved that there is no general algorithm that can determine whether any given computer program will finish running or go on forever, a problem known as the halting problem. This is essentially a computational echo of incompleteness. Some problems are undecidable, no matter how much computational power you have. In philosophy, Gödel's theorems challenge notions of knowledge, truth, and rationality. They remind us that the universe of thought is bigger than any formal system we construct. There will always be ideas that cannot be captured by definitions, truths that elude the grasp of logic, and insights that come not from derivation, but from intuition. Even in theology and metaphysics, Gödel's work has been interpreted in various ways, some seeing in it evidence of a transcendent truth beyond human comprehension, others finding a mathematical mirror for the limits of human reason. Perhaps most striking is how Gödel's work reflects back on itself. He proved, using mathematics, that mathematics cannot fully prove itself. It's a kind of intellectual jujitsu, turning the system inward until it reveals its own blind spots. This act of self-reference, mathematics studying the boundaries of mathematics, is not just clever, it's deeply human. It mirrors our own quest for understanding, our desire to build complete models of the world, and the humbling realization that every model, no matter how elegant, leaves something out. The puzzle that has no solution, as Gödel showed, is not a failure but a feature. It is a sign that our systems, for all their power, are bounded by the very rules that define them. There is always something just outside the frame, something true that cannot be trapped by proof. In recognizing these limits, we don't diminish mathematics, we honor its depth. Gödel's theorems are a reminder that in the search for knowledge, even in the most precise of sciences, there will always be mystery. And sometimes, the most profound truths are the ones we cannot prove. The idea that a whisper could move the sun sounds like poetic exaggeration, but it's a metaphor that captures the startling power of chaos theory, specifically the butterfly effect. In chaos theory, the butterfly effect describes how tiny changes in the initial conditions of a system can lead to massive, unpredictable differences in outcome. The term was popularized by meteorologist Edward Lorenz, who suggested that the flap of a butterfly's wings in Brazil might set off a tornado in Texas weeks later. While the metaphor is whimsical, the underlying mathematics is sobering. In complex systems, like the weather, ecosystems, economies, and even galactic structures, small perturbations don't fade away, they amplify. And in a universe governed by such systems, a whisper could indeed echo out and, over time, shift the motion of stars. Chaos theory doesn't imply that the universe is random. It means that it is highly sensitive to starting conditions. Two systems can begin almost identically, but if there is even a microscopic difference in their initial state, their trajectories can diverge dramatically over time. This sensitivity is what makes long-term weather forecasting so difficult. No matter how precise our measurements, there's always some level of error or uncertainty. And in chaotic systems, those tiny uncertainties grow exponentially. Over time, they render prediction nearly impossible. The math behind this phenomenon shows that many systems are deterministic, following known rules, but practically unpredictable. When Lorenz discovered the butterfly effect in the 1960s, he was running computer simulations of weather systems. One day, he re-entered a number with a slightly shortened decimal, like 0.506 instead of 0.506127, and expected the computer to generate nearly the same results. Instead, the entire simulation evolved in a radically different way. This was a shock. It meant that, in systems like the atmosphere, perfect prediction might be permanently out of reach, even with perfect models. Small inputs could create cascading consequences. This idea is not limited to weather, it's found throughout nature. In ecosystems, the disappearance of a single insect species might eventually cause the collapse of a forest. In economics, a seemingly minor policy decision can spiral into global financial chaos. In human biology, a single mutated gene can cause a cascade of cellular failures, leading to disease. But perhaps most awe-inspiring is the fact that this applies on cosmic scales. The universe itself is a chaotic system. Planets, stars, and galaxies follow the laws of physics, but their interactions, especially when many bodies are involved, can become unpredictable over time. In astrophysics, scientists studying n-body problems, systems with multiple gravitationally interacting bodies, encounter chaos all the time. While the motion of two bodies, like Earth and the Moon, can be predicted with great precision, adding just one more body complicates things exponentially. The Sun, planets, moons, and countless asteroids influence each other through gravitational forces in ways that are mathematically chaotic. A small shift in the position of a minor asteroid, a solar flare, or even the gravitational tug from a passing star could, over millennia, subtly alter the orbits of planets. These changes might take millions of years to show noticeable effects, but the system is constantly shifting in ways that are impossible to fully predict. From this perspective, the whisper that moves the sun isn't metaphorical. It's a reminder that in chaotic systems, there is no such thing as an insignificant influence. A minor fluctuation in solar radiation might affect Earth's climate, which alters ocean currents, which shifts weather patterns, which impacts ecosystems, which influence atmospheric composition, and on and on. The interconnectedness of the universe means that cause and effect are not always linear or immediate. Sometimes they are dispersed, delayed, and exponentially magnified. This doesn't mean that we are powerless in the face of chaos. It means that small actions matter in ways we often underestimate. In climate science, for instance, understanding the butterfly effect underscores the urgency of addressing seemingly small factors. A slight increase in greenhouse gas emissions might not seem catastrophic today, but in a system as complex and sensitive as Earth's atmosphere, it could tip the balance toward runaway effects. Likewise, in technology and engineering, recognizing chaos means designing systems that are resilient, adaptable, and aware of their own sensitivity. Philosophically, the butterfly effect challenges our understanding of causality and control. It suggests that the world is not just a machine where inputs lead to predictable outputs. Instead, it's a vast, dynamic web where everything affects everything else, sometimes in ways we may never detect. It also invites a certain humility. If a butterfly's wings can influence a storm, then so can a whisper, a thought, a decision. The systems around us are not waiting for grand, obvious inputs. They are always in motion, always responding, and always on the brink of unexpected change. Chaos theory has changed the way we think about science, not by discarding determinism, but by revealing the limits of predictability. It tells us that complexity is not the same as randomness, and that patterns can emerge even from disorder. It also tells us that the world we live in is more delicate, more interconnected, and more alive with possibility than we once believed. A whisper may not literally shift the orbit of the sun, but in the language of chaos, it can begin a chain of events that eventually does. The smallest things, in the right context, at the right time, can reshape the universe. Plants are often seen as passive, silent life forms, growing slowly, anchored in place, driven only by sunlight and soil. But emerging research suggests they are far more perceptive than we once believed. One of the most surprising discoveries in recent years is that plants can hear water, not with ears or nervous systems, but through a sensitivity to vibration. Experiments have shown that plant roots grow toward the sound of running water, even when no moisture is present in the soil. This challenges the long-held notion that plants respond only to chemical and light cues. Instead, it reveals a more dynamic organism, one that uses subtle mechanical vibrations to navigate its environment. In a study conducted by scientists at the University of Western Australia, researchers placed pea seedlings in pots with two tubes, one carrying water and one empty. When both tubes were buried in dry soil and only the water-filled tube had running water, the roots consistently grew toward that tube. Even more compelling, when the roots had no access to moisture but were exposed to the sound of water through speakers, they still oriented themselves in that direction. This indicated that the plants weren't just sensing humidity gradients or chemical signals, they were responding to the physical sound of water. This finding has profound implications for how we understand plant behavior. Plants, of course, lack ears, brains, and central nervous systems, yet they exhibit complex responses to their surroundings, including light, gravity, temperature, and now sound. The ability to detect vibration adds a new layer to this picture. It suggests that plants are capable of a kind of environmental awareness that operates on different principles than those found in animals. Instead of processing sensory data through neurons, plants rely on cellular structures that respond mechanically to stimuli. Their cells can stretch, shift, or activate biochemical pathways in response to touch or vibration, which in turn affects growth and direction. The idea that plants respond to sound is not entirely new. Earlier studies have suggested that plants can alter gene expression, growth rates, and even flowering patterns when exposed to specific sound frequencies. Some research has shown that certain vibrations can enhance seed germination or increase resistance to pests. Others have reported that plants subjected to music or rhythmic sound waves grow differently than those in silence. While some of these studies are debated or difficult to replicate, the growing body of evidence points to a broader truth. Plants are not deaf to their environment. They are tuned to physical signals that we've only recently begun to recognize. The mechanism by which plants detect sound is still being investigated. One possibility involves mechanoreceptors, proteins embedded in the cell membrane that respond to mechanical forces. These receptors may be sensitive to the pressure waves of sound, triggering internal signals that guide root growth or activate stress responses. In essence, sound becomes a form of information. To a plant, the low rumble of water underground could serve as a directional cue, much like light serves as a cue for photosynthesis above ground. This kind of response doesn't require consciousness or cognition in the way humans understand it. It's an automatic, biological reaction, finely tuned by evolution. That raises fascinating questions about how plants interact with their environments and with each other. If they can detect vibrations from water, might they also detect the movement of insects, the rustle of a neighbor's leaves, or the subtle footfalls of animals? Could this sensitivity be part of a broader communication system? Some scientists have proposed that root systems might listen to the movements of nearby roots or sense mechanical disturbances in the soil, allowing them to optimize growth strategies or compete for resources more effectively. Others suggest that plants might even be capable of distinguishing between different types of vibrations, reacting differently to those that signal danger versus those that signal opportunity. This kind of behavior stretches our definitions of intelligence and perception. Plants don't think, but they respond. They don't hear, but they listen in their own way. As we uncover more about plant behavior, it becomes harder to draw sharp lines between passive and active, between organism and environment. Plants are not just shaped by their surroundings. They shape themselves in response to subtle, often invisible cues. Their lives unfold on a different timescale, and their methods of sensing and responding are unfamiliar, but no less real. Understanding that plants can detect vibrations also has practical applications. In agriculture, It could lead to new techniques for improving water efficiency. By using specific frequencies to guide root growth, farmers might reduce irrigation needs or help crops survive in arid conditions. In conservation, it could inform how we restore degraded habitats or understand how plant communities respond to environmental stress. It also shifts how we relate to the natural world. If plants are this responsive, this attuned to the subtleties of their environment, then our impact on them goes deeper than we realize. Ultimately, the discovery that plants can hear water invites a rethinking of plant life itself. It reveals a form of intelligence that doesn't require a brain, a way of sensing that doesn't require eyes or ears. Plants are not passive furniture in the landscape. They are dynamic, responsive, and deeply engaged with the world around them. They sense gravity and light, touch and sound. They remember past stresses and prepare for future threats. They are constantly listening, not in the way we do, but through a language of movement, growth, and vibration. What we thought was silence is full of messages, and what we thought was simple is astonishingly complex. There are moments when an idea seems to strike out of nowhere, a perfect line for a story, a clever solution to a problem, a melody that flows effortlessly through your mind. You feel the spark of originality, the thrill of creation. But what if that idea wasn't truly yours? What if it was something you had encountered before and simply forgot that you had? This phenomenon is known as cryptomnesia, a psychological occurrence where a person believes they have come up with a new idea, invention, or piece of creative work, when in fact it is a forgotten memory resurfacing without context. The mind mistakes recollection for innovation, and what feels new is actually remembered. Cryptomnesia, from the Greek roots for hidden memory, is surprisingly common and remarkably deceptive. It's not plagiarism in the malicious or intentional sense. Rather, it's a cognitive illusion where the source of the memory has faded, leaving behind the content, but not the context. The brain retrieves the information, but fails to tag it as something previously encountered, leading you to believe you created it. This mix-up happens because our memory systems are not perfect. They store information in complex, overlapping networks, and separating the what from the where or when can be difficult, especially when emotions or attention were low during the original encounter. One of the most famous examples of cryptomnesia involved George Harrison of the Beatles. His 1970 solo hit, My Sweet Lord, was later found to be strikingly similar to the 1963 song He's So Fine by the Chiffons. Harrison claimed he had never intentionally copied the melody, and the court accepted that it was a case of subconscious plagiarism, cryptomnesia in action. He genuinely believed he had composed something original, but his brain had recycled a tune heard years earlier. This wasn't dishonesty, but the mind's way of reorganizing forgotten material. Writers, musicians, inventors, and thinkers across history have encountered this strange trick of the mind. Friedrich Nietzsche wrote about the idea of cryptomnesia without naming it, observing that many of his original thoughts were likely the products of past readings long forgotten. Mark Twain humorously noted that there is no such thing as a completely original idea, only variations on existing themes rearranged by individual minds. Psychologists now understand that memory is reconstructive, not reproductive. We don't retrieve information the way a computer pulls up a file. We rebuild it from fragments influenced by present context, mood, and other memories. This makes creativity itself a more complex and nuanced process. Innovation often relies on recombination, taking old pieces and assembling them in new ways. But when the origin of a piece is forgotten, the line between inspiration and replication blurs. A novelist might invent a plot twist that mirrors a childhood book. A designer might imagine a style they absorbed from years of museum visits. The mind draws on a vast, often unconscious reservoir of experiences and impressions. Most of the time, this is harmless and even productive. It's how culture evolves, how knowledge is transmitted, and how ideas grow across generations. But cryptomnesia also raises important questions about ownership, authenticity, and how we define creativity. In academic circles, unintentional plagiarism due to cryptomnesia can still have serious consequences. The legal system, as in Harrison's case, must distinguish between intentional copying and subconscious borrowing. In the world of science, researchers have at times been accused of stealing ideas that they may have encountered years earlier in conferences or papers, only to recall them later as if they were their own. The phenomenon shows how fragile and fallible memory can be, and how easily our confidence in our own originality can be misplaced. At a more personal level, cryptomnesia plays a role in everyday conversations and beliefs. You might repeat a fact or opinion thinking it's your own insight, when it's really something you read in a news article last week or heard from a friend a year ago. You might believe a decision was based on your own reasoning, unaware that it was shaped by a long-forgotten comment or commercial. This isn't dishonesty, it's the brain's shorthand. By discarding source tags to save space or cognitive effort, the brain sometimes blurs the boundary between external influence and internal thought. Cryptomnesia is also a window into how identity and memory intertwine. We like to believe we are the authors of our own thoughts, the curators of our ideas, but the reality is more collective and porous. Our minds are deeply interconnected with the world around us, shaped by language, media, relationships, and history. Recognizing cryptomnesia doesn't diminish creativity. It deepens our appreciation of it. It shows that every idea is part of a larger web, a tapestry of influence and inheritance. In this sense, originality becomes less about pure invention and more about unique perspective, the ability to filter, combine, and reinterpret what already exists in a way that feels fresh and meaningful. Understanding cryptomnesia also invites more empathy. It reminds us that mistakes in attribution are not always ethical failings. They can be cognitive blind spots, symptoms of how memory works. When someone inadvertently repeats an idea, they may not be stealing it. They may genuinely believe it is their own. Recognizing this allows us to be more generous in our interpretations, more aware of our own fallibility, and more curious about the strange, layered architecture of thought. In a world overflowing with information, ideas move faster and farther than ever. We absorb so much, so quickly, that separating the original from the remembered becomes harder every day. Cryptomnesia is not a flaw to be ashamed of. It's a feature of how minds work in a social, cultural, and historical world. We are all remixers, building from the past without always realizing it. And sometimes, the memory you never made is just another way your brain is reminding you that you are never thinking alone. On December 26, 2004, one of the most devastating natural disasters in recorded history struck the Indian Ocean. A massive undersea earthquake with a magnitude of 9.1 to 9.3 ruptured the seafloor off the coast of Sumatra, triggering a tsunami that swept across the region and claimed more than 230,000 lives in 14 countries. The human and environmental toll was catastrophic, but beyond the overwhelming tragedy, something extraordinary happened. something that could only be measured by the most sensitive instruments on Earth. For 13 seconds, time itself seemed to freeze. Seismographs around the world recorded a strange phenomenon. The Earth began to ring like a struck bell, its vibrations resonating across the planet in deep, low-frequency waves. The planet had, quite literally, started to sing. This ringing was not metaphorical. It was a measurable seismic event known as a free oscillation. When a massive earthquake such as the 2004 Sumatra Andaman quake occurs, the sudden displacement of the Earth's crust releases an enormous amount of energy. That energy doesn't just radiate outward in the form of seismic waves that shake the ground and trigger tsunamis. It also sets the entire Earth vibrating in specific resonant modes. These are the same kinds of natural resonances that allow a bell, when struck, to emit a pure tone. But in the Earth's case, the tone is an extremely low-frequency hum, inaudible to the human ear but detectable by global seismographic networks. These global oscillations are called normal modes. They are the planet's deep, internal pulse, vibrations that can last for days or even weeks, slowly diminishing over time. The 2004 earthquake was so powerful that it excited multiple of these modes, including one that caused the Earth to resonate every 13 seconds. That means the entire planet subtly expanded and contracted, or shifted back and forth, in cycles that repeated about once every 13 seconds. These oscillations were not something that altered human experience in the moment. You wouldn't feel them under your feet, but seismologists watched the Earth's pulse echo through their data long after the earthquake's shaking had stopped. This phenomenon is a stunning reminder of the Earth's dynamism and interconnectedness. The idea that the planet can ring like a bell suggests a kind of planetary cohesion, that everything is linked through its mass, structure, and capacity to transmit force. The vibrations don't just travel through the crust or upper layers, they reverberate through the mantle, the core, and back again. In this sense, the Earth is not static or silent. It is a living, moving, humming body whose movements are mostly invisible to us, revealed only in moments of massive disruption. Free oscillations were first definitively recorded after the 1960 Valdivia earthquake in Chile, which remains the most powerful earthquake ever measured. That event, with a magnitude of 9.5, similarly caused the Earth to ring. But the 2004 event confirmed with greater clarity how deeply a single rupture can affect the planet's entire structure. Researchers have even noted that the quake redistributed enough mass to slightly shift the Earth's axis by several centimeters and shorten the length of a day by a few microseconds. Time itself, measured by the planet's rotation, was subtly altered. That shift is imperceptible to daily life, but measurable with precise atomic clocks and satellite data. It's as if the Earth, shaken by trauma, recalibrated its spin and began a new rhythm. The metaphor of a bell is helpful but incomplete. Bells ring with clarity and tonal precision, and the Earth's ringing is far more complex. It produces multiple modes simultaneously, overlapping in patterns that can be analyzed like chords or layered frequencies in music. Seismologists can decompose these waves into different types: spheroidal modes, which involve radial expansion and contraction, and toroidal modes, which involve shearing motions without volume change. Each mode reveals something different about the Earth's interior. The way these waves move tells scientists about the density, composition, and elasticity of the materials they pass through. In this way, earthquake-induced ringing becomes not just a global resonance, but a diagnostic tool, a way to peer into the hidden layers of the planet. What makes this even more humbling is that the Earth is always vibrating. Even without massive earthquakes, the planet experiences a constant low-level hum caused by ocean waves, atmospheric pressure shifts, and subtle geological activity. But these background vibrations are quiet, requiring sensitive equipment to detect. Only during massive quakes does the Earth's voice become unmistakably loud in seismic terms. The 2004 tsunami, tragic and destructive as it was, gave scientists a rare moment to study the Earth in a state of profound resonance. This kind of global event forces a shift in perspective. In our daily lives, the planet feels stable and still. We don't notice its constant motion, its subtle rotations, or its deep rumbles. But when we zoom out through science, data, and technology, we see that Earth is never truly at rest. It's flexing, vibrating, ringing, and rotating with a complexity that defies casual observation. The idea that the Earth rang like a bell is not poetic license. It is literal truth backed by physics and measurement. And it's a reminder that we live on a dynamic planet whose movements, however slow or deep, shape the conditions of life itself. In that moment after the 2004 earthquake, when the seismographs caught the rhythmic 13-second beat, something awe-inspiring was revealed. The Earth had spoken, not in language, but in vibration. It had absorbed an unimaginable force and responded in kind, its voice spreading across the globe. We may never hear it with our ears, but the instruments we've built can translate that voice into knowledge. And that knowledge deepens our understanding, not only of our planet's inner workings, but of the scale, power, and interconnectedness of all life on Earth. When time froze for 13 seconds, it wasn't just a glitch in the clock. It was a planetary memory, etched in waveforms, echoing across the crust, reminding us of the Earth's unceasing pulse. Your name is one of the first sounds you learn to recognize, and one of the few things you'll likely hear and write thousands of times over a lifetime. It's an intimate part of your identity, woven into your sense of self from the earliest years. But research shows that the influence of your name might go much deeper than simple familiarity. The name-letter effect, a psychological phenomenon first identified in the 1980s, suggests that people have an unconscious preference for the letters in their own names, especially the first letter. This seemingly trivial bias has been linked to surprisingly significant outcomes, from the careers people pursue to the places they live, and even the people they choose to love. The name-letter effect was first described by psychologists Joseph Nutin and others, who found that individuals tend to rate the letters in their own names as more attractive than other letters in the alphabet. When asked to rank letters on how much they liked them, people consistently gave higher ratings to the ones that appeared in their own names, especially their initials. This preference was observed across different cultures and languages, suggesting that it's a universal quirk of human cognition. The explanation lies in the concept of implicit egotism, the idea that people unconsciously associate positive feelings with things connected to themselves. It's not just about liking letters, though. The name-letter effect appears to influence behavior in ways that can shape life decisions. Studies have shown that people are disproportionately likely to live in cities that start with the same letter as their first name. For example, a statistically higher number of people named Louis live in St. Louis, and Denises are slightly more likely to live in Denver. Similar patterns have been observed in career choices. One study found that people named Dennis or Denise were more likely than average to become dentists, while those named Laura or Lawrence were overrepresented among lawyers. It's not that these names determine fate, but that subtle, unconscious preferences might nudge people toward decisions that feel familiar or right in ways they don't fully realize. The effect extends to romance as well. Research has suggested that people are more likely to marry someone whose name starts with the same letter as their own. This could be due to a blend of familiarity, positive associations, and a kind of cognitive ease that comes with similarity. We're drawn to things that resemble us, not just in appearance or background, but even in how they sound and feel. Our names become a kind of template for comfort and preference, guiding us toward choices that feel subtly affirming. These findings don't mean that names are destiny. Plenty of people live in cities that don't share their initials and pursue careers that have nothing to do with their names, but they do reveal something profound about how the human mind works. We like what feels familiar. We gravitate toward echoes of ourselves. This can influence how we make decisions, not through conscious reasoning, but through a background hum of implicit bias. Our brains are constantly processing associations, and the ones tied to our sense of self often get preferential treatment. Implicit egotism, the psychological theory that underpins the name-letter effect, suggests that we are subtly drawn to things that reflect ourselves because we associate the self with goodness. Most people like themselves, at least at some unconscious level, and that self-liking spills over into the things that are linked to the self, like names, initials, and birthdays. It's part of a broader cognitive shortcut that helps us navigate a complex world by steering us toward the familiar and the personally relevant. But it also means that we may be influenced in ways we don't fully recognize. Critics of the name-letter effect have pointed out that some of the early studies may overstate the case or fail to account for confounding variables like socioeconomic status or cultural naming trends. More recent research has found that while the effect is real, it may be weaker or more context-dependent than originally thought. Still, the core idea remains compelling, that our names are more than labels. They are cues that shape perception, emotion, and behavior in subtle but meaningful ways. The implications stretch beyond psychology into marketing, education, and social interaction. Brands that align with a person's initials may seem more trustworthy. Students might respond more positively to teachers who share part of their name. Even online behavior, like username selection or domain choice, can be influenced by the gravitational pull of the self. Understanding the name-letter effect can help illuminate the hidden forces that guide decision-making and the ways identity shapes perception. On a more philosophical level, the name-letter effect invites reflection on how much of what we consider personal preference is actually rooted in automatic processes. We think of ourselves as agents making rational choices, but often we're being gently nudged by associations we've carried since childhood. Our names are not just sounds, they are emotional signatures tied to identity, memory, and comfort. They affect not just how we see the world, but where we go, what we do, and who we love. In the end, the name-letter effect is a reminder that the self is both more powerful and more pliable than we might think. Our identity doesn't just express itself in words. It echoes through our choices, patterns, and preferences. And in those echoes, we can hear how the mind, in its quiet bias for the familiar, shapes a life one letter at a time. Deep in the archives of Yale University's Beinecke Rare Book and Manuscript Library lies a book that has confounded historians, cryptographers, linguists, and curious minds for more than a century. Known as the Voynich manuscript, it is a mysterious, richly illustrated codex filled with strange plants, zodiac diagrams, bathing women, and pages of text written in an unknown script that no one has ever been able to decipher. Discovered in 1912 by a rare book dealer named Wilfrid Voynich, the manuscript has resisted every attempt at translation or explanation, inspiring theories ranging from lost medieval knowledge to alien communication to an elaborate hoax. Its origins, purpose, and meaning remain among the most enduring literary puzzles in human history. The manuscript itself is about 240 pages long, though it may have originally contained more. Carbon dating places the vellum pages to the early 15th century, around the 1400s, but that only tells us when the parchment was made, not when the ink was applied. The illustrations depict unfamiliar botanical drawings, circular astronomical charts, peculiar anatomical diagrams, and continuous blocks of text in a flowing, looping script that looks deceptively ordered, as if it should make sense. The language, however, doesn't match anything known, past or present. It has no obvious grammar, no repeating words that line up with any known language, and yet it exhibits patterns that suggest it's not simply random scribbling. That is what makes the Voynich manuscript so strange. If it were merely gibberish, one would expect a degree of chaos, but the text is structured. It follows statistical patterns similar to natural languages. Certain characters appear more frequently than others, and word-like clusters are spaced in ways that suggest syntactic order. This has led many to believe that it is a genuine language or code, just one that we have not yet been able to crack. Over the decades, some of the world's most brilliant code breakers have tried. During World War II, top cryptanalysts at Bletchley Park attempted to apply the same techniques used to break German ciphers. More recently, computer algorithms and AI models have been unleashed on the text, looking for patterns and translation keys. So far, nothing definitive has emerged. The manuscript's content only adds to the mystery. The botanical section is filled with drawings of plants that do not match any known species. Some resemble known herbs, but are strangely distorted, as if viewed through a surrealist lens. The astronomical and cosmological diagrams include moons, stars, and zodiac symbols, yet they don't correspond to known medieval models. The so-called balneological section features naked women bathing in tubs connected by tubes and pipes, possibly suggesting alchemical or medicinal practices. Then there are the recipes, pages filled with text and stars, possibly denoting magical or scientific formulations. But without knowing what the words mean, all interpretations remain speculative. Some believe the manuscript is a pharmacological guide, a medieval medical textbook encrypted to protect secret knowledge. Others think it's a religious or esoteric document, perhaps from a now-lost mystical sect. A few suggest it's a piece of outsider art, an intensely personal expression of someone with a unique worldview, perhaps even a form of glossolalia, or speaking in tongues. There is also the theory that the entire book is an elaborate hoax. This idea proposes that a clever forger, perhaps even Voynich himself, created the manuscript to mystify and profit from its mystery. But if that's the case, the forger would have had to construct hundreds of pages of consistent, non-repeating gibberish, with illustrations and themes aligning across sections, a level of complexity that seems almost implausibly laborious for a con. The alien theory, while more fringe, taps into the enduring allure of the unknown. Could the Voynich manuscript be a message from another world, Some enthusiasts point to the unidentifiable plants and bizarre anatomical drawings as evidence of an otherworldly origin. But without supporting context, these interpretations fall more into the realm of science fiction than scholarship. Still, the fact that a book can resist understanding for so long makes it a magnet for the imagination. In a world where so much has been mapped, decoded, and explained, the Voynich manuscript remains a rare object of pure enigma. Even attempts at linguistic analysis have produced more questions than answers. Some researchers believe the text may be a constructed language, similar to modern conlangs like Esperanto or Klingon. Others argue that the symbols may not represent sounds or letters at all, but ideas or images, making it a logographic or ideographic system like Chinese or ancient hieroglyphs. Each new theory spawns debate, and yet none has achieved consensus. Every few years, a new study makes headlines for claiming a breakthrough, but these are often disputed, and the manuscript remains unreadable. Perhaps what makes the Voynich manuscript so compelling is not just that it is unsolved, but that it has survived. Through centuries of war, fire, neglect, and confusion, this fragile book has endured, carrying its message, whatever it may be, forward through time. It's a reminder of how much we still don't know, how many voices from the past are lost or locked away in scripts we can no longer read. It challenges the assumption that everything mysterious must have an answer. Some puzzles persist, not because we haven't tried hard enough, but because they were never meant to be easy. The Voynich manuscript may one day be deciphered. It may turn out to be a treatise on medieval herbalism, an encoded love letter, a forgotten work of fantasy, or the ultimate intellectual riddle. Or it may remain silent forever, its pages filled with meaning that only its author could understand. Whatever the case, it holds a unique place in our cultural imagination. A book no one can read, yet one that continues to speak, in its strange script and haunting illustrations, to the timeless human hunger for meaning in the face of mystery. For centuries, the color purple was not just a shade. It was a symbol of absolute power, divine authority, and unimaginable wealth. Unlike other colors, which could be extracted from common plants or minerals, purple dye came from an astonishingly rare and labor-intensive source: the mucus glands of sea snails, specifically those of the Murex genus found along the Mediterranean coast. It took tens of thousands of these creatures to produce a single gram of dye, making purple not just expensive, but almost sacred. The effort, scale, and suffering involved in its production helped shape empires, fueled economies, and left a stain, both literal and historical, on the fabric of global power structures. The earliest known use of this dye, often called Tyrian purple, dates back to the ancient Phoenicians, especially the city of Tyre, in modern-day Lebanon. They discovered that when crushed and fermented, the spiny Murex sea snail produced a deep, rich color that ranged from crimson to violet, depending on the chemical process and exposure to sunlight. The dye did not fade with time or washing. In fact, it seemed to grow more vibrant. It clung to cloth with such tenacity that it became known as imperial purple, and it would become one of the most enduring symbols of aristocracy in the ancient world. Because it was so expensive to produce, purple quickly became a visual shorthand for status. Only the richest elites could afford it, and over time, laws were enacted to preserve its exclusivity. In ancient Rome, sumptuary laws forbade anyone but the emperor and high-ranking officials from wearing garments dyed in Tyrian purple. It became a color of exclusivity and dominance, a sign that the wearer was not merely powerful, but ordained, touched by something beyond the common world. Emperors, kings, bishops, and emperors again, centuries later in Byzantium, wrapped themselves in purple to embody divine rule. But this status came at a cost. Producing Tyrian purple was a gruesome business. Thousands of sea snails were harvested from the Mediterranean shores, their shells cracked open to extract a tiny gland. These glands were then left to ferment in large vats under the sun, a process that released a stench so foul that ancient dye workshops were often located far from city centers. The industry devastated local snail populations and reshaped coastal economies, turning dye-making centers like Tyre into powerful hubs of trade, politics, and maritime influence. In many ways, the pursuit of purple dye fueled the expansion of Phoenician sea trade, helping to establish far-reaching connections across the Mediterranean long before the rise of the Roman Empire. Over time, the symbolism of purple seeped into every corner of imperial identity. Byzantine emperors were said to be born in the purple, a phrase that indicated not just noble birth, but direct succession from divine power. Their robes, ceremonial halls, and even ink were dyed with the royal hue. In medieval Europe, the association with power and privilege persisted, often tied to both monarchy and the church. Bishops and cardinals adopted purple robes to reflect their spiritual authority, and the tradition continues today in many Christian denominations. But the purple monopoly also became a symbol of exploitation. The dye's production relied on laborers who toiled in harsh, toxic conditions. The environmental damage was severe, with coastlines littered with broken shells and dye vats. The wealth it generated flowed upward, enriching the ruling classes while burdening the laboring population. Like spices, gold, and silk, purple became part of the machinery of imperial dominance, sought, hoarded, and regulated as a tool of political identity and economic control. The reign of Tyrian purple began to fade with the fall of the Byzantine Empire and the rise of new trade networks. But it wasn't until the 19th century, with the invention of synthetic dyes, that purple lost its monopoly on power. In 1856, an 18-year-old chemist named William Henry Perkin accidentally synthesized mauve, the first artificial purple dye, while attempting to create a malaria drug. And suddenly, what had once cost a fortune could be manufactured cheaply and in bulk. The democratization of color had begun. Purple was no longer reserved for emperors and elites. It became available to the masses. Fashion houses and textile factories embraced the new purple, and what had once marked divinity became a stylish, sometimes even rebellious choice. This shift marked more than a technological innovation. It symbolized a cultural transformation. The collapse of purple's exclusivity mirrored the erosion of monarchies and the rise of modern democracies. When anyone could wear purple, the color began to lose its mystique, and with it, a piece of the old world's hierarchical structure. Still, echoes of its legacy remain. Graduation robes, ceremonial garments, and royal regalia often include shades of purple. The color still conjures power, prestige, and depth, even if its cost no longer demands an empire to sustain it. Today we see purple as a color of richness, spirituality, or creativity, rarely considering the blood, sweat, and crushed shells it once required. But the history of purple is a story of how something as simple as a color can command armies, build economies, and define civilizations. It reminds us that symbols are never just aesthetic. They're political, environmental, and deeply human. Purple changed empires, not because of what it was, but because of what people believed it meant. And for centuries, that belief shaped the world. At any given moment, you feel awake, alert, and in control. You make decisions, recall memories, form opinions, and direct your attention with apparent ease. But the truth is far stranger and far more humbling. You are only partially conscious. The vast majority of what your brain does happens beneath the surface of awareness, invisible to the you that thinks it's steering the ship. Consciousness, for all its richness, is a thin veneer over a storm of neurological activity that never reaches your inner spotlight. You are, cognitively speaking, the tip of an iceberg, where the visible part floats above the water, but the massive foundation lies hidden below. Neuroscience has revealed just how much of the brain's work takes place outside of conscious thought. Your visual system, for instance, processes millions of pieces of information every second, yet you only see a filtered, edited version. You're not aware of the blind spot in each eye where the optic nerve exits the retina, because your brain fills it in automatically. You don't consciously notice every flicker of light, subtle color gradient, or motion in your peripheral vision, yet your brain is processing those details, deciding which are relevant and which are not. Similarly, your auditory system is constantly picking up sounds that you don't realize you're hearing until something important, like your name or a sudden loud noise, snaps you to attention. These automatic filters are not flaws. They are features. If you were consciously aware of everything your senses took in, you would be overwhelmed in seconds. The same principle applies to thought and decision-making. While we often experience our choices as deliberate and reasoned, research suggests that many decisions are made before we are even aware of them. In famous experiments using EEG machines, neuroscientists have shown that the brain begins preparing for a physical action several hundred milliseconds before a person consciously decides to move. You feel like you're making a spontaneous choice, but your brain has already started the process. This has sparked intense debate about free will and whether consciousness is really in control or simply rationalizing choices that were made unconsciously. Much of what you experience as you is in fact a running commentary created by the brain's default mode network, a network of regions that stitch together memory, prediction, and emotion into a coherent narrative. This narrative self tells you who you are, what you're doing, and why, but it's not always accurate. In fact, it often makes up explanations after the fact. When you make a snap judgment or have a gut reaction, the conscious mind quickly fabricates a reason to explain it, not realizing the true cause came from layers of neural processing that never made it to awareness. Even your sense of time, self, and space are partly constructed. You think of yourself as a stable, unified being, but the brain is constantly integrating diverse signals from different parts of the body and environment to maintain that illusion. When this integration fails, due to injury, drugs, or neurological disorders, the sense of self can fracture, split, or vanish entirely. People with certain brain injuries have reported feeling as though their body no longer belongs to them, or that time has stopped. In split brain patients, where the connection between the two hemispheres has been severed, each side can operate independently, making conflicting decisions without the other's awareness. Consciousness is not a singular force. It's a coordination of many processes that only appear unified. Dreaming offers another glimpse into the limits of awareness. During REM sleep, the brain generates vivid sensory experiences and emotional reactions without any input from the outside world. You can run, cry, fly, or fight in a dream, and it all feels real. until you wake up and realize it was all created internally. What's remarkable is that during this time, your conscious brain is largely offline. The prefrontal cortex, associated with rational thought and self-awareness, is quiet, yet entire worlds unfold. This suggests that the machinery of experience doesn't require consciousness to operate. It only needs consciousness to reflect on and interpret. Moreover, our emotional lives are also shaped largely by unconscious systems. The amygdala, one of the brain's emotion centers, can detect and respond to threats before the conscious mind even registers them. A flash of fear, a wave of disgust, or a feeling of attraction often arises first in the body, then is noticed and interpreted by the mind. You don't choose your emotions. They arise from below and only later become part of your conscious experience. The idea that we are only partially conscious forces a profound re-evaluation of what it means to be human. It suggests that much of what we do, think, and feel is not under our control in the way we imagine. It doesn't mean that consciousness is unimportant, but that it's not the whole story. It's the user interface, not the operating system. It's the highlight reel, not the full game. The real work is being done behind the scenes by circuits and systems that operate with breathtaking efficiency and complexity. Understanding this can lead to humility. We are not fully transparent to ourselves. We act from motivations we don't understand, make choices we can't fully explain, and form beliefs shaped by unseen influences. But it can also lead to wonder that such a delicate illusion of control and awareness can emerge from billions of neurons firing in synchrony is nothing short of astonishing. Consciousness may be just a sliver, but it is a luminous one, offering a glimpse into the depths below. And through it, we catch brief, flickering insights into the ocean of thought, feeling, and perception that forms the greater part of who we are. Beneath the crust we walk on every day, deeper than any ocean trench and farther down than the roots of the tallest mountains, lies one of the most astonishing discoveries in modern geology: an ocean beneath the Earth. This is not an ocean in the traditional sense, with vast open waters and waves, but rather a massive reservoir of water trapped within the crystalline structure of minerals deep inside the Earth's mantle. Scientists estimate that this hidden water could be 3 times the volume of all the surface oceans combined. Locked away hundreds of kilometers below our feet, it rewrites our understanding of the planet's water cycle, geology, and even how Earth became habitable in the first place. The discovery was made possible not through digging, no drill can reach that deep, but through the study of a rare mineral called ringwoodite. Ringwoodite forms under extreme pressure, typically found in the transition zone between the upper and lower mantle, roughly 410 to 660 kilometers below the surface. In 2014, scientists analyzing a diamond that had been pushed up from this zone found tiny inclusions of ringwoodite containing water, not in liquid form, but bound within the mineral's molecular structure. This was the first direct evidence that the Earth's mantle could store vast amounts of water. It confirmed theories that geologists had speculated about for decades, but never had physical proof to support. What makes this discovery so profound is how it changes the picture of Earth's water cycle. Traditionally, we think of the water cycle as involving evaporation, precipitation, rivers, and oceans. But this shallow view ignores the deep Earth processes that have been moving water in and out of the mantle for billions of years. Subduction, the process by which tectonic plates sink into the mantle at convergent boundaries, carries water-rich minerals into the Earth. This water is released as the minerals are subjected to increasing pressure and temperature, playing a crucial role in generating magma and triggering volcanic activity. The existence of a vast internal reservoir means that the mantle is not just passively involved, but may actually dominate the long-term distribution of water on the planet. The water in the mantle doesn't slosh around like a subterranean sea. It's chemically bound within minerals, existing as hydroxyl groups, O-, within the crystal lattice. Yet even in this form, it has powerful effects. It changes the melting point of rocks, alters their viscosity, and affects how tectonic plates move. In fact, the presence of water in the mantle may be what allows plate tectonics to function at all. Without it, the crust might be too rigid and brittle to subduct and recycle. Water acts as a kind of planetary lubricant, easing the movement of massive geological structures and enabling the dynamic surface processes that define Earth as a living planet. This hidden ocean also raises fascinating questions about the origin of Earth's surface water. One long-standing theory holds that much of our water arrived via comets and asteroids during the early days of the solar system. But the discovery of such enormous amounts of internal water suggests another possibility, that much of the water may have come from within, outgassed through volcanoes over millions of years. If Earth started with water-rich materials and has retained this internal reservoir ever since, then our oceans might be the visible expression of a much deeper planetary process. The surface ocean could be, in essence, the tip of a deep and ancient hydrological iceberg. Understanding the extent and role of this deep water also has implications beyond Earth. It may help explain why Earth is geologically active and capable of supporting life, while planets like Mars appear to have dried out and frozen. If Mars lacked a similar deep water reservoir, or lost it through early cataclysmic events, it might have never sustained long-term tectonic activity or a stable atmosphere. Conversely, if other rocky exoplanets have similar internal reservoirs, they too might be capable of sustaining dynamic, life-friendly environments. The presence of water deep within a planet might be one of the key ingredients for habitability, invisible from afar, but essential for sustaining the complex interplay of geology and climate. The discovery of water in the mantle also underscores how little we truly know about the inner workings of our planet. We've explored space more extensively than we've explored the Earth beneath our feet. The mantle is inaccessible to direct observation, and much of what we understand comes from indirect measurements, seismic waves, laboratory experiments, and the study of minerals pushed to the surface under rare conditions. Yet even these glimpses reveal a world of astonishing complexity and interconnection. The Earth's interior is not a static furnace, but a vibrant system where heat, pressure, chemistry, and now water interact in ways that shape the surface world we inhabit. The idea of an ocean beneath the Earth may sound like the stuff of myth or science fiction, yet it is rooted in hard science, supported by empirical data and peer-reviewed research. It invites us to rethink what we mean by an ocean and to appreciate that the Earth's systems are layered, both literally and figuratively. From the rain that falls on your roof to the steam rising from a volcanic vent, from the drift of continents to the birth of mountains, water is everywhere, seen and unseen, binding the planet together in ways we're only beginning to understand. The ocean beneath the Earth is a silent, hidden force, shaping the world not with waves, but with slow, immense pressure, drop by molecular drop, deep in the dark heart of the planet.